Maybe tell us what you had for breakfast today.
Is this like a trial run?
Yeah.
Okay, for breakfast today, I actually went out for brunch with my parents. We went to a nice cafe. I actually had the big breakfast, so it was smashed avo on toast. It had a couple of chorizos.
Or chorizo, as my dad says.
Yeah. So that's what I had for breakfast with a single origin long black. And that's got me going through today so far, and that's all I've eaten.
Tasty.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Hey there, how you doing? My name is Jordan Michaelides and I co-founded Neuralle with my partner Lauren. We built the Uncommon podcast to interview unique individuals and investigate interesting topics, therefore allowing our community to build the quote-unquote uncommon sense crucial to increasing their intelligence. And our investigations and interviews are largely inspired by people like Joe Rogan, Tim Ferriss, Charlie Munger, who's Warren Buffett's business partner, and particularly in Charlie Munger, who always really emphasized that worldly wisdom is incredibly important, not just for entrepreneurs and investors, but for your own growth as an individual. And he always used certain quotes, and the one that I love the most is Abraham Maslow's quote, which is, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I think by saying that, what he's trying to emphasize is that if you only have a certain skill set or knowledge base, then all you will see is that cognitive bias related to that skill set or knowledge base. And therefore, you need to broaden that. So we are really trying to investigate and uncover new guests and new topics for our community. If you want to learn more, you can head to neuralle.com/podcast. I hope you enjoy. This podcast has been an experiment and we need your feedback as a subscriber. So leave us a review, make your way to learn more about the competition and prizes that we have going. That is at neuralle.com/podcast, Neuralle. Some of the prizes include an Apple Watch 2 for all you high performers out there, a Kindle Paperwhite for you book nerds, an Amazon gift card for everyone else. You can also sign up to our, weekly brain food, which is the Monday Morsels at neuralle.com/signup. Make sure you check it out. In this episode, I recorded with Anthony Ross, who is a personal trainer and a friend from old circles back at high school. He has this very unique knowledge in evolutionary biology, health, and catastrophism. His constant drive to learn has really built these principles around these topics, and I think that really helps his clients maximize their genetic potential. And I've seen some of the results across those clients. They've been quite extreme. We covered a whole array of topics, including how to become a PT, the evolutionary side to health, which is often missed in a lot of personal trainers, thoughts on AI and biotech, his general principles on diet and nutrition and movement, the sugar versus fat debate and some of the misconceptions and new evidence around that, how he therefore eats. We covered psychedelics, so meditation, spirituality, how that's all affected through the use of psychedelics, and catastrophism, which is looking at cataclysmic events and how that has affected, Homo sapiens as a species over the years. Like I said, it's a really fascinating conversation. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks for listening. Anthony Ross, we are live. Thank you for joining.
No worries. Thanks for having me here today.
Perhaps we'll start. I think what we do with a lot of people is we just start with maybe a short bio on who they are. Mm-hmm. Maybe just talk about, tribal wellness, how you've come here today, we met back years ago.
Yep.
At high school.
Yep, that's correct.
The beast that you were back then.
Yes.
So yeah, tell us a little bit about Tribal Wellness and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a pleasure being here today, and thank you for having me on the show. I guess a little bit of context around, myself in the background. I run my own personal training business called Tribal Wellness. I guess the basic sort of philosophy and principle behind that is I really want to try and help people become better versions of themselves. And I guess that's something that I have a really strong passion for. And I guess I try and look at things holistically from a wide point of view from many different angles, because I think I'm sort of very critical of the personal training industry at the moment. I think there's a lot of personal trainers getting their qualifications too easily and too quickly without having sort of wider knowledge. And I think anyone is able to go and become a personal trainer and give you a good training session. And I think what differentiates, sort of top trainers versus a lot of the ones which are being sort of pushed out at the moment is their ability to take in a lot of other considerations in their lifestyle. And for me, that's more focusing on nutrition, how much sleep they're getting, what stresses are in their life. And I really try and encapsulate and bring those things together to really try and help people improve, in their health and their fitness and all in their overall well-being. Yeah. And that's sort of the angle and the slant that I take. And I guess the name Tribal Wellness came about because I've got a fascination with evolution. And I guess a lot of the principles that I incorporate into my philosophy has got an evolutionary twist to it. And I guess that's sort of how that came about. And I guess it's at the moment I'm working full-time corporate, and the personal training thing is more of a hobby at the moment where I train a lot of clients on the weekends. It's a very, very rewarding, sort of side hobby to have and industry to be in. So
going back to this holistic thing, because a lot of people, when they hear that, they think it's a woo-woo.
Yep.
What can you say about it? Like, do you think that, you mentioned before, it seems that anyone can sort of be a PT right now.
Yep.
What do they do? Like, what do you have to do to be a PT?
The industry's changed completely in the last 10 years since I've done my qualification. Even back 10 years ago, you could become a qualified personal trainer in up to 4 weeks full time. And, that's nowhere near enough training and qualification. Yeah, 4 weeks.
Wow.
So that's nowhere near enough time to obviously know enough about the body, nutrition, how it all comes together, and then to be able to go that out, to the marketplace and actually provide, instructions and information to clients. I think it's changed recently in the last few years where it's more and more, I think, to a 6 month and 12 month course. But even that, I think, is too short to be able to go out and prescribe, exercises to people who may have certain medical conditions or injuries, or who are living different lifestyles, to try and get enough knowledge to try and help them in their pursuits. It's very, very difficult. And I've been doing it for nearly 12 years now, and I'm still learning, and there's still things that I find out. And it's just, you need to, broaden your horizons. And I just don't think that you can learn enough in 6 to 12 month course to be able to go out there and help people in this complex thing that is, I guess, the health and fitness industry.
Yeah. Do you think that, when people do this PT course, is it that it just focuses on movement? It doesn't focus on anything? What does it sort of cover?
I think when I did it, was broken up into 5 different streams. I think one of them looks at, basic sort of physiology, how the body works, the systems, the structures. Another one sort of looked at the physiology, which sort of really broke down muscles, bones, how that all works. I think there was a business management side of thing, of basically how to run a personal training business.
Okay.
And there was a very small component on nutrition.
Wow.
And there's nothing that looks at sort of the alternative medicines, or looks at, say, traditional Chinese medicines, or what our ancestors have done. And it really looks at, I guess, from a textbook perspective, as opposed to actually what's working, what works for us as humans.
Yeah.
And the thing that I found frustrating, and still continue to find frustrating, is a lot of this new evidence is coming out from science and from all these different fields that aren't being incorporated into the course.
Right.
So I found that a lot of the information that's being taught is very outdated, and it's not up to date with the current science.
Yeah.
And it's really unfortunate, because a lot of these people pay top dollar to become qualified personal trainers, and it's, I think they're being let down by the system.
Yeah, but also they then go on to push this information to their clients.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the scary thing, that, you can do a course for 6 months and then go off and fully train someone. Like you don't know what their story is, their history.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what I've found is a lot of people, they either come from corporate or they come with no prior experience. They just have an interest in it and they go do the course and they go and prescribe, exercise programs. And it's a very interesting industry.
It is. It's one of those things that I was... obviously, you and I listen to Joe Rogan, and I was listening to this Gary Torbs, and he was the guy who wrote about this sort of fascination that the health in... He talks about bad science and good science, just at a higher level. But he was a guy who'd studied science. He was going to be a physicist, dropped out of uni, and focused on going back to uni as a journalist. So he would do science writing. And he was his thing was all focusing on good science versus bad science, and he found that the most amount of bad science was in health and general medicine and whatnot. And what he found, the gold mine for him back in the 80s, 90s was the whole debate of carbs versus fat and whatnot.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to sort of hear that. You studying PT and going to train people after that, and what trainers may learn, and how that sort of bad science is incorporated. Like, if you got to think, if you were a doctor, or if you were a physicist, you're not going to go to do a 6-week program.
Absolutely.
Now, like for people who, some people would argue, like, maybe you don't need. What would you say to the people who think maybe you don't need to do a lengthy 3-year program or anything like that?
If you want to be at the top of your game and you want to build a really successful business and a clientele long term,
you got to always be learning.
You've always got to be learning and continuing to better yourself, and also to help better your clients as well. It's a very tough one.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting though.
Absolutely.
So evolution. I mean, you and I, we've had heaps of conversations about this sort of stuff.
Yep.
What sort of, do you remember the moment where you thought, like, this is the topic that really intrigues me, and then what sort of broadened that? Like, where was the starting point?
Yep. I guess just sort of like most people in our time, you finish year 12, you don't know what to do. You've got a lot of spare time on your hands while you're studying at uni. I became really interested in psychology. So that led me sort of down, I guess, different paths to research psychology about the brain, what drives us on certain levels and behavior. And then it sort of got me thinking about, how did our brain develop? And that sort of led me down the evolutionary side to say, hang on, there was a really big leap in the size of our brain. So if you look at just as a brief overview of evolution, the current theory stands that, 6 to 8 million years ago, we sort of branched off from our common ancestors, which were the chimpanzees. And then slowly over the last 6 to 7 million years, we've evolved to become the species that we are. Now, what sort of current science is telling us at the moment is that about 2 million years ago, the first genus of our species, known as Homo, meaning man, came about, known as Homo erectus.
How many years ago was that?
That was around 2 million years ago.
Okay.
So 2 million years ago, we see that the emergence of Homo erectus, which is anatomically very, very similar to us, except they've got much smaller brains, a little more cave-like. They still look like us. If they were walking down the street today, they'll look very much like us, maybe a little hairier. They're still upright. They're walking on 2 legs. And one of the key things about them was their brain size was around 600 or 700 cubic. They call them cc's in evolution, which I think refers to cubic centimeters. Had a brain volume of 700 cc's.
Right.
And our current brains now in Homo sapiens form is around 12 to 1300 cc's.
Oh, wow.
So over the last 2 million years, our brain is pretty much doubled in size. And there's no real explanation as to why that's happened. So having an interest in psychology led me to look at why has our brain size doubled, over that sort of 2 million year period.
Yeah.
And I guess the prevailing theory at the moment is meat, the consumption of meat.
Yeah.
Which I mean, it's a very plausible theory, and it's a very interesting one. The fact that our ancestors would have been roaming around, they got access to meat, they started eating much more of it. It was protein rich, it was high in fats. Those essential fatty acids are critical for the development of the brain. Yeah. We would have been living on coastal areas, so we would have been eating much more fish as well, which would have led to that.
Yeah.
So that's sort of one theory relating to why our brains have developed, and I guess that's sort of the prevailing one at the moment in evolutionary science.
So just on that, over this, that change to eating meat.
Yep.
The I'm pretty sure this is based on what I've read, that they're saying that we were primarily living around trees or, areas like caves and whatnot.
Yep.
And we were a gathering species primarily, right?
Absolutely.
So like eating mainly like grasses and nuts and fruits and whatnot. And then it was moving towards being a scavenger species. So like, let's say an apex predator like a bear, lion, saber-toothed tiger, whatever, killed an animal, we would then go to the scraps that were left over.
For sure.
And yeah, sort of going to what you said, I'm pretty sure that the sort of trans period was us learning to like get the bone marrow, from the leftover bits of an animal that were there, and then that added to the brain as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's definitely, I guess, part of the meat sort of consumption theory. And it's a really interesting point you touched on regarding the scavengers. One thing that, I think people should be aware of is our ancestors, they had it bloody tough. You know what I mean? We were not at the top of the food chain back then. You would have had wild animals, you would have had, crazy birds that would have killed you, that would have been really, really violent times. And just to survive in that period would have been very, very difficult. And we are very fortunate as a species to be here today. And I can't even begin to imagine what they would have gone through. Just to get access to food.
Well, you can sort of see it in like the little reactions we have, the sort of what they call like the lizard brain, when you're reacting to things just immediately.
Absolutely.
The system 1 and system 2, as Daniel Kahneman calls it, you're just like bang. And then there's the system that's sort of that higher level brain that's able to sit back.
Definitely. And that's one really interesting point on that is a lot of work done by Daniel Goleman. He wrote the book called Emotional Intelligence in the early 90s. And one thing he touched on was the importance of a small part of the brain, which dates back to the reptilian part of the brain, which is the most ancient part of the brain that we have, is called the amygdala. So it's a very sort of small almond shape part of the brain right at the back, and that triggers what's known as our threat response, which is the fight or flight response. So that's where, if you get a shock around the corner or you need a boost of adrenaline, that's the response that kicks in that forces you to push adrenaline through your body, and either you're going to fight what's in front of you or you're going to basically run for hell. Yeah. So that's that primal response through that part of the brain.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting, because I think that sort of aspect of the amygdala, the context in which Daniel Goleman spoke about it was he called it amygdala hijack. And I guess in a corporate context or a professional context, a lot of people let their emotions get to them without actually thinking about what they're doing. And he called it amygdala hijack. So, because we can't control this part of the brain most of the time unless we have a high level of emotional intelligence. And I guess in the heat of the moment, people make snap decisions, which may or may not be the best decision. And they can't control that because this amygdala goes into autopilot and takes full control of our body and our brain.
Yeah. It's quite interesting, like us talking about the brain right now, like, have you seen much about like what's happening in that sort of, what we were talking about before, the human intelligence space? And like, what do you think about neuroprostheses? Like, how would you feel if you had, basically a chip implanted on your brain or something that sat outside of your skull that sort of was able to read your brain essentially? Because it's quite interesting, because they're saying that, I know that reading a lot about AI, that there's a massive issue with AI where you can't control it. And we're sort of all leaning in towards this like singularity sort of period,
Yeah.
And it sort of seems that we just have to merge with technology more and more if we want to survive as a species.
Absolutely. And it's, to be honest, it absolutely, I'm scared shitless of it.
Yeah.
Because it's, where do you draw the line between what technology is able to do and what we're able to do naturally as a species?
Yeah.
You only have to look what Google are developing. They had the Google Glass initially a couple of years ago, which was obviously a glass that you would put on. It had a camera.
Yeah.
It was able to put sort of augmented reality and put things over your eyeglasses. And now that sort of technology's moved and evolved more and more to contact lenses. And that's where it's going to get scary, where basically we become embedded with the technology. And anything that's technological based has got the propensity to be controlled or to be hacked.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I'm still very skeptical of having any type of electronic device attached to me, because I think we don't understand the long-term implications or what it would mean for us as a species.
No, it's still such a fascinating time to be alive, man.
It is, definitely.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens with all that, because I reckon the next 20 years will be like the key questions with AI, neuroprostheses and all that sort of shit. It's going to be fascinating.
Absolutely. It's really interesting because I think one thing which I think they've successfully done years and years ago, it was like a forbidden subject, is basically the thought of implanting ideas into people's heads.
Oh, yeah. Well, you can quite easily do that.
Absolutely. I mean, there was obviously studies that were done years and years ago. I can't remember the name. It's a marketing term where they I've just completely forgotten the name of it.
There's
subliminal advertising.
Like subliminal
messaging, yeah. So there was initial. This is I guess part of it where they did. I think it was in the 40s or 50s. They did a study in a cinema, and at a microsecond, split second, in the middle of a movie, they put the word popcorn up there.
Yeah.
That was too fast for our brains and our eyes to even process or register. But popcorn sales went up like 40, 50%.
So how's this, right? So because obviously we're interested in this area of cognitive science and neuroscience, we're obviously looking at things like Reddit and whatnot and all the piece of research that's coming out. There was a lady that presented at a recent cognitive science, I don't know what it was, like one of these forums, and she's been able to show that they can capture your decision-making through your eyes, through the VR goggles, and then be able to change, like it's at the microsecond, obviously, because for those who don't understand, there's no such thing as free will. Your brain's decided about it half a second before you've actually gone to move your hand, just as an FYI. So they've been able to do these sorts of things, measure that, and therefore theoretically, if they can do that, they could probably change it. And it's interesting, like this is where I think technology could be handy though, right? Like, you've watched, what is it? Is it How to Make a Murderer?
I haven't seen that.
Oh, Making a Murderer. Have you've never seen that?
Never seen it.
Okay. Have you got Netflix?
I've got Netflix, but I never watched it.
Man, you need to go see this. Okay. It's about a guy that basically is framed for a crime, gets out, and then later on is supposedly framed for another crime. It's sort of unclear, but watching the whole documentary series, it's fascinating. But, I mean, neuroscience, what I find mystifying is that neuroscience now has shown that they can quite easily change your opinion. Memory is so malleable, It
is, for sure.
Like you can, you take a person who's been in an extreme situation, let's say they've seen a terrorism attack, and then you ask them from the point in time that it happened to a day later, a week later, a year later, and their account of what has happened will totally change.
Absolutely.
And then as you tell them different things, when you interview them, that also implants a memory in their mind as well.
Absolutely. And the interesting thing about, obviously, the way our long-term and short-term memory work is once an event is imprinted in our brains, the next time we think about that, we're not thinking about the actual event, we're thinking about the last time we thought about it. So as you just mentioned, if you're remembering the event at snapshots, you're not remembering the actual event as it took place. You're remembering the last time that you remembered it.
Right.
So every time that you're going back, you're remembering the last time. So it's really interesting because...
Is that a particular term in psychology or neuroscience at all?
It probably is. I don't know off the top of my head, but it's...
I never thought of that. So you're basically, you have a memory of the situation, you talk about it, then the next time you talk about the memory of the situation, and so on, and it becomes like an exponential derivative.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And that's how our memory works. And unfortunately, like you said, I think over time we're susceptible to influence, which can change our thoughts. Key events that happen in our lives, which may shape the way that we view the world, are going to change the way that we interpret our memories as well, and the way that we view them. So it's really interesting that whole topic.
Yeah. So going back to the holistic side of things.
Yep.
What are your sort of, general principles on food and like movement? You've taught me a lot. I know you broadened my eyes to the type of people that are talking about these topics.
Yep.
I'm just interested to hear what are your sort of general principles on it.
Yeah, one thing that one of my general principles in life, and also particularly in relation to health and fitness and working out, is just to keep it simple. I mean, there's so much shit out there, like with information. Everyone's going to tell you to be doing this, to be doing that, eat this, do this. But the reality is just keep it simple. People try to overcomplicate things so much. And realistically, when you look at a lot of the basic movements, they work, and they work for a reason. So, particularly core principles that I like to think of, in terms of working out. just stick to the basics. Focus on your basic compound movements. I think for the majority of people that just want to be fit, want to be active, want to be strong, keep the body moving, focus on 4 basic movements, which will be a squat, which is going to be working basically all of your lower half of your body, a deadlift, which is your whole body being engaged.
Yeah, particularly the posterior chain, yeah.
Absolutely. And the other 2 ones for upper body would be a push movement, either a push-up or a dip,
right,
and a chin-up.
Okay, so like a pull movement as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think with those 4 basic movements, you're going to be covering 95% of the muscles that you need to be covering to get fit. Yeah. And a lot of people, really overcomplicate things. Like I go in the gym time and time again, and I'll see guys there for 20 minutes just doing bicep curls. And, if realistically if you stop and look at the size of your body and you look at the size of the bicep muscles compared to
ridiculous.
Your back muscles, your leg muscles, your hamstrings, even your calves, they're tiny. Your biceps are tiny in comparison. So
this is one of the things that you highlighted to me when we caught up recently, was like just focusing on even the size of the muscle. Like you said something to me that the lat is the biggest muscle in the body, or is it the quad?
I think I couldn't tell off the top of my head.
But it's either one of those 2, right?
Yeah.
It's huge.
It's massive.
And there was something that you said about like when you exercise that muscle, the amount of energy it requires to recover is far greater than if you focus on specific muscles, right?
Absolutely.
Together.
Absolutely. And I think any one of the listeners here today will know if you do a heavy squat, or you really push yourself in a leg, whether it's a squat, a lunge, or even a deadlift, or even if you do burpees, you're going to notice you're going to be significantly more fatigued after 5 or 6 solid sets of that versus bicep curls.
Yeah.
And the reason is because on a neuromuscular level, you're engaging so many more muscles, and it is that difficult to perform that exercise that you're going to be engaging, all these different systems in your body on a far greater level than what you would if you were just working at a smaller muscle group.
Yeah.
And you only have to walk into a gym. Sorry guys, but majority of guys have got chicken legs.
Yeah, for
unfortunately,
sure.
Because the reality is it's hard to do legs, to be doing squats and deadlifts. It's hard and it's painful.
You just forget about it. Like I mean, when we caught up like last year, I'd just completely forgotten about doing things like squats and deadlifts. And fuck, man, it really dawned on me when I started doing that again and because I was using gymnastic rings, right?
Yep.
As opposed to just doing weights. Now the gym I'm at, they've got both gymnastic rings and weights. So it makes such a difference because it is like it's 50% of your body, right? And it's how we're sort of built.
Absolutely.
Like we're built to walk
Yep.
all day long.
And again, if you look at things through an evolutionary context, our ancestors, on the savannah of Africa or wherever they were, they wouldn't have been doing bicep curls. They would have been running. They would have been sprinting, jumping, climbing. The last thing they would have been doing is working out the smaller muscle groups. So they would have been doing the heavy lifting on the core muscle groups.
Yeah.
And that's with a lot of the clients that I've trained, and I'm sure you've seen as well, when you focus on those core muscle groups, you get the greatest benefit.
Definitely. So that's for movement. When it comes to nutrition.
Yep.
What are sort of your core principles there?
Again, I just try and keep things simple. I think a lot of people, majority of people, if you ask them about their diet and nutrition and you say what's bad about it, most people will roughly be able to have an idea of what's wrong. Oh, I'm eating too much sugar, or I'm eating too much chocolate, or I should be getting this. So most people know what they need to do, but actually going through and doing it is another thing. And I think when people think about diets, one thing they need to consider is it's not about what you do eat, it's more about what you don't eat. And I think some of the key things that are really important that people need to be aware of, 3 things. Primarily sugar, because it's highly toxic to the body. 2 would be gluten.
Okay.
A lot of people, not only gluten intolerant, even though they're unaware of it, but obviously the damage it does internally to our systems and that bloated feeling. Another one's dairy.
Right.
If people can eliminate gluten, sugar, and dairy, I guarantee that you will feel much better.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite interesting. Like I obviously don't. I mean, I've got fructose and lactose intolerance, but eliminating those things has made a massive difference.
Absolutely.
And like sugar, man, sugar's one of those interesting things. I don't know if you've been watching Joe Rogan recently, but he's getting fired up about it. How like basically the sugar industry in the 50s and 60s, for not that much money either, basically paid these scientists to show that fat was the issue in our diet.
Absolutely.
So like And this is the problem I have. Like, let's say you're sitting down with your parents. Your parents are grown up during the 70s, 80s, the high carb, like going marathon running and all that sort of shit. They're eating high carb, all that sort of stuff. How do you convince them? How do you talk to them about how this suits our, I guess, predisposition as a species better? Like, just from an evolutionary perspective.
It's very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Like, very, very difficult, especially...
Like, how did you convince your parents? Or have you convinced your parents?
I haven't convinced my parents, and that's the thing. It's like, I think that's that sort of love-hate relationship you have with your parents, They try and give you advice, you don't listen. You give them advice, they don't listen. You know what I mean? So that's a very interesting balance, I think, between your parents. But it's very hard, I think, especially for that generation, from our parents' generation onwards, as you said, because they've grown up with this mindset of, carbohydrates with bread, and especially because they've been on potentially the same diet for 40, 50 years, to then go and change, that's very, very difficult. And that's one of the interesting things about human behavior is we're very, very resistant to change. And a lot of people don't like to change their behaviors. Because one of the things I believe in is, and I try and educate my clients on this as well, is basically if you are not willing to change, or one of the barriers that's preventing people from changing is basically they have to admit that they're wrong.
Okay. It's a hard thing.
Which is a very, very difficult thing to do, to say, for someone to stop and say, all right, here's this new evidence, here's this information. Fuck, what I've been doing for the last 50 years is wrong. I made a mistake. Now it's time for me to change. And a lot of people can't swallow that information, and it's very, very difficult.
Yeah.
I want to mention another guy on the topic specifically of carbohydrates. I think he's a South African professor named Tim Noakes.
Okay.
So he was a guy, he initially wrote, I think, a lot of book, and he was the proponent and I guess the spearhead of that carbohydrate movement of the 70s, 80s and 90s. So he was the lead scientist that was saying carbohydrates are awesome. We need to do this. It's good, before exercise. And then about 10 years ago, he actually stopped. He looked at the other side of the equation that people were presenting to him and saying, maybe carbohydrates aren't so good. And he's done a full 180. He is completely against carbohydrates now. He's got documentaries, he's got books, he's even openly stated and he's apologized why he was wrong about it. And I think for someone who's so prominent in the industry and who's a scientist and a doctor,
to do that, yeah, that's
a very brave move to basically say, you know what, for the last 40 years, I'm sorry, I've fucked up, I've provided the wrong advice. Now I want you to follow this advice. And there's a really good documentary which he features in, and it's called Serial Killers.
Okay.
Cereal meaning being the one that we eat for breakfast.
Yeah.
So for those of you that are interested, there's a really good documentary called Serial Killers.
Okay. What's it about?
It really looks at the idea that fat has played a much more critical role in our diet over the long periods of time. We should be consuming much more fats as opposed to carbohydrates.
This is the thing that's a loss on a lot of people as well. Like, you need fat and cholesterol for your cells to exist.
Absolutely, we do.
If you don't have it, you're fucked. And hence inflammation and therefore fat.
Yep. And that's one of the misconceptions, to try and lose fat, you actually need to increase the amount of fat that you consume.
Yeah.
It's almost it's a counterintuitive idea. And I think one that's sort of taking off more and more as more information comes to light, especially with, you've got people on Instagram pushing it. There's a lot of YouTube information. And I think it's just a matter of time, because I think a lot of people are out there, they're trying these things and they're seeing that actually it does work. Yeah.
Well, it's one of the things that Gary Taube spoke about is that, and just for everyone, we're going to link all this stuff, so don't worry. Is he just said that it was this confusion that people have been taught that dietary fat is the problem. The dietary fat equals body fat.
Yep.
And they're totally different things, because your body, the thing that stores fat is not so much the food, but the what you call the hormetic response afterwards. Right?
Definitely. Absolutely.
So the things that you eat will affect how your body responds overall. Like things like cortisol release, storage of fat and so forth. So yeah, that's one of those things that sort of gets lost on people. They just think that you put this type of macronutrient in and that is the whole answer to the effect on it.
Yep.
And yeah, it's problematic because I just remember I remember sitting down with my parents and their family friend, they were getting fired up, man, because they're like, what are we meant to do? We've been told this one thing in the 80s and then it was this. Because, like, you know, you had like high carb, then Atkins, and then low fat.
For sure.
And then now paleo is like the thing.
Yep.
So it's hard, but, you know, what would you say to people who find it difficult to keep up? Would you say just because I know this is what Eugene said in our podcast as well, is just keep on top of it.
Absolutely. And it's very, very difficult because obviously there is a lot of information out there and there's also a lot of misinformation. And as you've just touched on, you've got all these different people pushing these different agendas. There's, you know, the sugars, there's even diets now that are promoting, you know, potato diets. There's the paleo movement. And it would be confusing. And no one has realistically got the time to be siphoning through all of this information to really analyze what's going on and to make a decision for themselves.
Yeah.
And if I look back to some of the core principles of which I believe in and which I try and educate my clients on, it's just keep it simple. And if you look at through an evolutionary context, what our ancestors would have done, predominantly they would have got what they would have been able to gather or scavenge because they wouldn't have had the technology or the resources to go out and hunt, particularly for meat all the time. And I think how that would translate today in our everyday lives would be a lot of fresh fruit, a lot of vegetables, going organic when we can because it's free of pesticides, and just being mindful of the shit. Like, I mean, everyone knows what's bad for them. They know that the burgers are bad, the chocolates. There's so many documentaries at the moment that are out there on sugar. There's a documentary that was made here locally in Melbourne called That Sugar Film, which I'm sure a lot of people...
Yeah, that was amazing.
Really good documentary.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people know what they need to do. You just cut the crap, focus on really good whole foods.
So what do you eat? How does your day look?
How does my day look? It really depends. And I guess over the years, I've become much more in tune with my body, and I sort of know what does and doesn't work. I think it really sort of fluctuates. So some days I might be super hungry, some days I might not eat. And I think particularly Monday to Friday, because I work corporate, I'll go maybe 2 or 3 days a week where I'll fast. So I won't eat anything until about 12 o'clock in the afternoon. And there'll be other days where I might have a bulletproof coffee in the morning and then not eat till lunchtime. Other mornings I might wake up ravenous and I might have breakfast, which could be chia seeds soaked in almond milk. It could be just a banana. It could be a couple of eggs and avocado. Yeah. So it really, really depends. And I said, I'm really in tune with what's going on and how I'm feeling on the day. So I really try and vary it as much as possible.
Yeah. Like, do you find that you have predominantly more fat? Like, let's say if you were to look at the scope of your week and you were to break down the three, like carbs, fat, protein, do you reckon like at least 50% of that would be fat?
I would definitely say, 50%. I eat a lot of avocado, especially. I cook a lot of my food in coconut oil and olive oil. I'm eating a lot of nuts throughout the day.
Lots of veggies.
Lots of vegetables as well. Yeah. Like one of my favorite all-time things at the moment is making fresh hummus.
Yeah.
Can of chickpeas in the blender, a little bit of olive oil. You can smash an avocado in there if you like, and just with carrots and a bit of cucumber.
Do you when it comes to protein, how do you work that out? Are you eating like, you know, a fistful at a meal, or like, because I feel like a lot of people eat probably too much. I know I've been eating too much protein.
Yep.
And because one of these things that I've learned recently is that when you have too much protein, you get something called glucogenesis, right? I think it's called. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But basically, when you have too much protein and you're not needing it for repair, or you're not, you know, moving enough or exercising enough, particularly when you're sedentary, that often gets converted to fat and stored in the body. Definitely. Yeah.
And this is a very confusing thing, because obviously the bodybuilding industry, the fitness industry, you know, all the supplement industry, they're really pushing the agenda of protein. Go for a workout, get protein. And that's one of my beliefs that sort of really changed over the last 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
You know, I've over the last, 10, 15 years while I've been working out, I've tried every diet, I've tried every exercise supplement, I've tried every routine just to see what does and doesn't work. I got to a stage where I was taking 2 protein shakes a day. I was eating, 6, 7 eggs a day. I was eating a chicken, steaks. And, don't get me wrong, I was feeling strong. I was working out. I was bulking up. But there was just this, I just wasn't feeling right. Right. And it's really been in the last sort of 12 months where I've done more and more research on, I guess, the vegetarian and veganism, just to have a look to see what their side of it's like. And it's just something I'm trialing at the moment, and I'm trialing it 3 days a week. I'm feeling amazing. You know what I mean? And I think that whole sort of protein myth, it's it's a fallacy, or it's something that we've been told we need a certain amount of protein, and it's just something, more and more over time that I'm believing we don't really need. If you look at a lot of science is saying you need 1 gram per pound of body weight, or a gram per kilo. So for me, I'm 95 to 100 kilos. Does that mean I need 100 grams of protein a day? I don't know. And all of the available science that's out there at the moment, it's very conflicting, very confusing. So, I mean, even at the moment, the last, 6 to 12 months, I've been doing 3 days a week vegetarian. My protein intake might only be 30 or 40 grams a day. Mm-hmm. And I'm a relatively big guy, and I haven't noticed any adverse effects of having lower protein on those days.
Yeah.
If anything, I'm feeling great. My strength's up. I haven't lost any conditioning at all. So that the whole thing about protein is a really interesting topic at the moment, and it's one that I haven't made my mind up quite fully about, but I just think especially the supplement industry is telling you to have a lot more protein, and it is one of the most essential, I think, nutrients for cell growth, repair, to fix all the damage it's done. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely needed, but I think the amount is far less than what we've been told and sold to.
So on a day when you're having more protein, how much would you have?
It might be anywhere from 100 to 150 grams.
Okay. Right.
So a can of chickpeas, you can get through that easily if you make a thing of hummus, and that's 35 grams of protein.
Oh, really?
A spoonful of peanut butter's got nearly 10 grams of protein. So it's especially if you're living sort of a vegetarian lifestyle, it's quite easy to rack up that sort of amount of protein. But even a small amount of chicken has got 30, 40 grams of protein without you even realizing.
Yeah.
1 egg has got 6 grams of protein. So, you smash 2 or 3 eggs, there's almost 20 grams of protein right there.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting one on the whole protein topic, and it's one that I think sort of needs a lot more study and further investigation. And I think the scientific community hasn't really come to, I guess, an agreement on what's right or what's wrong.
Yeah.
Again, if we go back and have a look at through an evolutionary context, I think we can see that our ancestors, whilst they were hunter-gatherers, they wouldn't have had access to meat every single day. A lot of people, we're very, very grateful for the society that we live in, where we wake up and we've got food available. We can go to the supermarket. And in many ways, we've lost touch with that element of being able to go out and get our own food and understand where it comes from. And, on the savannah, we wouldn't have had access to meat every day. Like if you were in the wild, I can only imagine how hard it would be to try and hunt down and track and kill a wild animal.
Yeah.
It'd take you all day. And even looking at the current hunter-gatherer tribes that are living in the Amazon and in the Kalahari Desert in Africa, very rarely they may only kill an animal once or twice a week if they're lucky. Yeah. So they have to rely on what they gather to survive.
Yeah.
And I think that fits perfectly with sort of what the paradigm or the way that I'm trying to live at the moment, which is sort of part-time vegetarian, part-time, sort of, I guess, paleo, if you will.
Yeah.
Because there are times where we don't have access to meat. There are times when they would have killed an animal and they would have just indulged and gorged on
the animal,
whatever they were killing.
Yeah, and eaten all of it as well. That's
Absolutely.
The thing that I realized, I go and eat like these chicken, let's say you get like chicken wingettes, right? Like how many chickens went into just that, as opposed to if you just buy a whole chook.
Yep.
And then how many animals go into that. But like going back to what you said, I think that all people, if they eat meat, they should be prepared to at least see an animal be killed.
Yep.
Or have to go through the process. Like I'm trying to find, it's hard, man. Like I'm trying to find a friend or a family friend that goes, and if anyone knows anyone, let me know, that goes hunting, because I think that if I'm prepared to eat meat, I should be willing to hunt an animal and see how that sort of knows, where you eat everything of the animal, I think it's really important.
Absolutely. And I think, as I sort of touched on before, there is a real disconnect with our society at the moment of where our food comes from. And I think if people actually saw what goes on, particularly in a lot of these factory farmed,
they're horrible.
I think a lot of people would never eat meat again if they actually saw the way that animals are treated. Yeah. It's really quite sad. And like you said, I think if people actually go out there and kill an animal themselves, I think they would actually think twice about how much meat they consume.
Yeah.
And one really interesting thing which I want to touch on also is hunter-gatherer tribes which have currently been studied in Africa. What's really fascinating is when they kill an animal, the majority of the animal that they eat are the organs,
the
offal, all the fatty stuff. And a lot of the time they leave behind all the protein in the meat because all of the nutrients are in the brain, the eyes, the liver, and it's not worth them to get the protein a lot of the time.
Well, actually, now, when you say that, it reminds me when you see other apex mammals, bears, lions, any other sort of predator, the dominant animal in that group will eat the organs, whereas the other animals will predominantly, like if you fully watch a video of a pack of lions hunt an animal, there's actually a lot of meat left over. I've realized. I looked at that recently, and they hole out the middle of it, like so they do eat all of the offal, which is quite intriguing. But like it's interesting. I've been reading a bit of research on like, would you ever eat petri dish meat? You know, like if it tasted the same as the meat that you could buy at a supermarket, and you found out it was just made from the cells of a dead animal, would you consider it?
Probably not.
Really?
Like I at the moment, I've moved my whole lifestyle, and all the food that I consume is organic, and I want it to be grown as Mother Nature intended, and that's in the earth or eating the fresh flora and fauna that's available to us. And I'd have a problem eating something that's been grown in a lab and manufactured, as opposed to something that Mother Nature gifted us with.
Yeah. So going back to the sort of your core principles, who sort of inspired you, or who are the first people that you started looking at? I know Marxism was one.
Marxism was one, definitely. And for those of you that don't know him, I'd highly recommend you go and have a research of him and some of his principles.
Yeah.
His website is marxdailyapple.com. And he's also written a really interesting book called The Primal Blueprint, which is a basic book, explains sort of the basic philosophies behind the evolution, looking at our basic movements and the foods that we should be consuming. So he's one which I found really fascinating. The other one, which is another guy, which is really interesting, I think his name is Lauren Cordain.
Okay.
So he's the number one guy who wrote the book called The Paleo Diet.
Right.
So he's actually backtracked and done a lot of research, because an initial scientific paper was published, I think, in 1984 or 1985 by a guy called Boyd Eaton. And it was, I think, something to do with, Paleolithic nutrition. So this was written in the mid-'80s. This guy was ahead of his time in terms of looking at what our ancestors would have eaten based on sort of what would have been available at the time. And that was pretty much, once that was published, that was pretty much buried for almost 20 years. And what this Lauren Cordain guy has done is basically pull all of that out, and he's revived it. And he's been, I guess, the pioneer of the Paleolithic movement more from a scientific point of view and bringing that research to light. And Marxism gets a lot of his, I guess, initial facts and sources from this guy. And I guess just trying to find, the right information, just have an open mind. There are a lot of good and bad articles out there, but it's just keeping an open mind, reading information that you find interesting.
Yeah, use things like Nature. Nature.com has got really good peer-reviewed research, I find. And you can find a lot of things that will both discount and prop up the position you have. So it's important to go look at those sorts of websites.
Absolutely.
Because there's research from both sides, and then, they test pretty well, otherwise it wouldn't be published, right?
Absolutely.
So I find Nature's pretty, like, for everything, it's probably the most referenced. I mean, maybe the Smithsonian, but, nature.com is awesome.
And another one I'd also recommend is Mercola.com. Mercola, so MERCOLA.com.
Yeah.
He's a doctor in America, and he basically writes on all things sort of natural health, nutrition, exercise, and his website is just a wealth of information.
Yeah.
Anything you can think of relating to health and nutrition, it's all there.
Okay.
And it's all sort of taking whilst he's a medically trained doctor, he takes an alternative way of approaching things.
Yeah.
And so that's a really good source of information.
Yeah, I think if you can find any doctors or GPs that have that sort of holistic view, they're not just looking at blood panels, and they're looking at just your lifestyle. I think that's really important.
Absolutely.
Do you take any supplements or anything anymore?
Yeah, I do. It's sort of narrowed down from what I used to take.
Yeah.
At the moment, I take a supplement called ZMA, which is a mix of zinc, magnesium, and vitamin B6.
Okay.
So I take that before bed, which is meant to help with your recovery and the release of certain hormones overnight.
Is that a particular brand, or
no? It's, I guess, the formulation ZMA is just sort of a what they call it.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a mix of zinc, magnesium, and vitamin B6. I'll take vitamin B12.
Okay.
Every now and then, because I think that's sort of one of the vitamins which I think globally there's a deficiency in vitamin B12, and that plays a very, very important role in our overall well-being, our cells functioning, and particularly the way our brain operates. And I think it's especially important for those that, may be on a vegetarian or vegan diet to look at supplementing with vitamin B12, because one of the only ways that you can source B12 is through meat products.
Okay.
And that's sort of why on the days where I don't go vegetarian, so where I am vegetarian, or on other days where I've got low consumption of meat, I might just chuck in a B12 tablet here and there.
Yeah.
And another supplementation I'm on at the moment is probiotics,
Okay.
just for the gut health.
Yeah, it's really interesting talking about that. Like, as you know, I've got this fructose lactose problem, right? I just had my gut bacteria DNA mapped.
Really?
So they were able to, I wish I could show you, that it's quite complicated, but basically they were able to break down all of the bacteria in my gut. And then, so there was about 6 or 7 types or strains, and then what families they sit within. And then so they were able to show through the 6, low abundance, relative abundance, high abundance, all that sort of. So there's different levels, and it's quite interesting how I'm really lacking lactobacillus, and there was another one there that's associated with people who have IBS. But yeah, I found this gastroenterologist, man, Dr. Paul Frooms, for those who have IBS. I'm hoping I can get him on for a podcast to talk about the microbiome one day. But yeah, he basically, you got 2 ways of doing it. You can either have fecal matter transplant,
Yes.
which is not cheap, or you can do like an oral supplementation where they basically peg down your gut bacteria with antibiotics, and then they reintroduce the ones that you're lacking so that it can bring it up to the same level as what a normal individual would have. So yeah, you bring the total bacteria down and then bring the percentages so they're more even. And then you supplement that to, like, one of the notes was like gut permeability. I would have low gut permeability, which is common with people with IBS. But do you do any other things for like gut health? Like, do you take,
So in terms of gut
like,
health,
prebiotics
it's
or-
obviously the probiotic tablets that I take.
Okay.
And I'm also at the moment, I make my own sauerkraut.
Oh, okay.
So
Nice.
all it is just cabbage and salt.
Yeah.
So that's how easy that is to make.
Dude, you know what's fascinating? Speaking of sauerkraut, kombucha. I've read a piece the other day that 2 people in the world have died from making homemade kombucha.
Really?
Yeah, because they didn't test it properly, and it was to do with there's like a sort of a poisoning in the bacteria. So like the bacteria itself had gone bad. So yeah, for those at home, make sure you use the appropriate testing kits.
Shit, I better be careful, man, because I'm brewing my own kombucha as
well,
well.
like are you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've
so
got my own scobies going, and it's I haven't
you
had a
should-
problem so far. I'm off the head.
I think like in places like Australia where this sort of shit can be a bit more regulated, then maybe you wouldn't have this issue. But I definitely think you should be using a testing kit of some kind. So look into that. But
Definitely.
so you have sauerkraut.
So I've got sauerkraut, which I make, which is obviously really beneficial for the bacteria in the gut.
Okay.
And also, ferment my own kombucha.
Okay. And okay, so that's supplementation. So you're not doing as much anymore. At the moment, I take krill oil and vitamin D because I work in an office.
Yep.
But I try and get out in the sun as much as possible. And then I also, because I had this, I had like my DNA mapped basically. I've got this unique polymorphism where I get like an acid is produced that makes me hungry, and something that suppresses the production of that acid is coconut oil.
Really?
So I take a big spoonful every morning. So that was quite interesting. Now, in terms of, again, going holistic, and I think just focusing on movement and nutrition is not the way to be. I want to talk about like mobility and recovery. What do you do for that? You're talking you were supplementing before. You've done float tanks.
I have done the float tanks, yes.
Do you do meditate, or do you massage? Like, do you get a massage every other week, or what do you do?
For me, I think one thing that sort of really relaxes me is I meditate. I try and do it every single day.
Okay. When do you do it?
I normally do it before bed.
Okay.
So my mind gets really active at, right before bed at night. That's sort of when it just turns on. So for me, I really need it. Otherwise, I can't sleep. So for me, it's really important. I try and do 20 minutes before bed. I also do yoga once a week. I do that. It's a yin style, so it's much slower. You focus much more on the stretching. It's a much more meditative effect. And I've just found that to be really beneficial in terms of being more content with who I am. You're much more peaceful and calm. You think about things a lot differently. So that's been a really good step, I think, moving towards yoga, and I'd highly recommend that type of exercise for someone who hasn't sort of given it a try.
Okay.
And I think it's really important for even for guys to give it a go, because I think there's a stigma in society for,
definitely.
that it's just for chicks or whatever, and it's not, it's not really good. But I challenge any guy, no matter how strong, weak or strong, to go into one of these yoga sessions, particularly a vinyasa flow one that's sort of really fast paced.
Okay.
Fuck me, Dad,
they're intense, right?
Oh, it is harder than you think.
Yeah.
Getting in sort of push-up positions with your legs up, holding things, twisting. It really is eye-opening, and you will be sore for days after, I guarantee.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult.
So meditation, yoga.
Yep.
Do you do any journaling, or do you have a diary at all?
I guess not formal journaling, but I do have a diary which is called A Sentence a Day. So you can buy it from the store here in Australia called KKK.
Oh, yeah,
and basically it's a 365 day journal. Every single day it prompts you with a question. It'll say, what was the last movie you saw, or name one thing you loved about today. And every single day there's a different question. And I guess it's just a really good way for you to sort of just close the day off, write something good that happened, from the question that it prompted you with. And it's just a really good way. It just makes you feel good.
Yeah. Now, going back to what you said about, you're doing yoga once a week. Mm-hmm. What do you do for exercise, like weights and whatnot?
Mm-hmm.
Like, are you pushing weights at the moment?
Yes, definitely. So,
and how many days a week?
That's one thing that's completely changed for me over the last couple of years. In terms is the way that I work out and the way that I view working out. I think the last, early on in life, sort of when you're 15 onwards to 18, and even sort of up until my mid-20s, I would just be in the gym 5-6 days a week, because that's the mentality and that's what you think's right to do, just to really smash yourself every single day. And I guess it's sort of really counterintuitive, because you're not doing yourself any favors by doing that all the time. And one thing that I've really tried to incorporate into my workouts over the last couple of years is more variety. So instead of being purely based in the gym, just smashing the weights, every now and then I'll go outdoors. I mean, we're here in Melbourne, the weather's good. There's outdoor gyms everywhere. Look on your local council website and have a look where the outdoor gyms are. Okay. I know there's a really good one down on St Kilda Beach there.
Yeah, I've been to that one. Yeah.
So it's just got chin-up bars, it's got dip bars, stuff that you can be outdoors and be out in nature.
Yeah.
I've recently bought a bike, so I'm riding to work a couple of times a week. I'm doing yoga once a week.
Do you work in the city?
So I work in the city, yeah. So
and you're riding into the city.
And I'm riding into the city, so it's it takes me less than an hour, so it's not too bad. And I guess because I'm working in Port Melbourne at the moment, so I go all the way up Beach Road. It's beautiful. It's almost a relaxing form of exercise, and it doesn't feel like it's exercise. I put a podcast in the morning, ride to work, takes me an hour. Beautiful. It doesn't even feel like I'm exercising.
Yeah.
And in terms of weights, I'm trying to get into the gym at least sort of twice a week, just doing some sort of, I guess, pushing something physically. I'll do a leg workout once a week, because I'm really sort of focusing on my legs and my core and my lower body much more than what I used to. And then the other second session will just be purely upper body.
Okay.
Just rotate with the basic compound movements.
And are you so how many days in total do you reckon you're exercising during the week?
It really varies depending upon workload, my time commitments. But I'm trying to do at least something every single day, even if it's even if it's after work. Just going home and stretching for half an hour, put a podcast on, relax, do some stretching, even if it's a walk for 10, 15 minutes, as long as you're doing something. Yeah. And I think that's the key thing for a lot of people to consider when they're trying to make changes in their life. It's got to be small baby steps. So, even for the person who might be sitting on the couch or wondering where to start, go for a 10, 15-minute walk. That's your first step. Yeah. Start off small and then slowly increase. And it doesn't take long.
Yeah. Cool.
And one thing I also want to touch on before, which about what I do to relieve stress, I have cold showers.
Oh, they're amazing.
They are amazing. And for those of you that haven't had a cold shower, I highly recommend trying it.
This is one thing I've noticed. So I go to work, I do, let's say, 9 hours work a day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then I come home and I work on Neuralle for an hour to an hour and a half every night. So it's a decent amount of work.
Yep.
But I've found that having a shower in between that period can completely change the level of stress that I have and the mindset. But also, if you're ever feeling like fucking really down, depressed or annoyed, you have, if you cycle between hot and cold, and then particularly have like a cold 30-second, like as close to you can as no hot water as possible, man, you feel amazing afterwards.
Absolutely.
Like to the point where, when your skin gets tight, that sort of cold. But yeah, that's really useful. And I mean, they've shown that they're starting to use that in treating people with depression.
Absolutely. And I think one of the key reasons is the cold exposure triggers the release of a hormone called norepinephrine. And basically what that is it's basically a feel-good chemical.
Yeah.
So you have a cold shower, it forces the body to produce this chemical, and that's where it helps with depression because it makes us feel really good. And that's why, if you have a cold shower, as soon as you come out, you feel amazing.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I really would recommend for people to at least try.
Yeah.
Again, as I've said, try and start off small, even if it's for 20, 30 seconds at the end of your shower. Just have a lukewarm shower, get used to it. And then over time, your body becomes adjusted and acclimatized to it. And the benefits are absolutely amazing.
Yeah. When it comes to like measuring and testing, do you do regular blood panels, or do you are you like regularly measuring like the type of weight that you're pushing, or is it more that you get your annual checkup for a blood test, and that you'll just make sure that you're maintaining the same level of performance in the gym?
I think for me, I'm very in tune with my body, so I go by how I'm feeling.
Okay.
I think one of the most critical things for people is to be able to measure their progress and see snapshots.
Okay.
I think for the majority of people, they don't want to get too complicated and be doing blood tests unless they've got a certain health condition where they may need to sort of be measuring that, particularly if they've got diabetes or other health conditions like cholesterol related. But I think for the majority of people, it's just keeping it simple. What's your body weight? Taking key measurements, around your hips, your waist, maybe measurements of your arms, your legs. And I think really just going by how you feel, because a lot of people are too focused on the numbers that they see on the scales. And that's one thing that I try and educate clients not to focus on too much.
Yeah.
Go by how you feel, how much energy you're having, how you're feeling outside of work, how you're sleeping, what your stress level's like, what your energy levels are like throughout the day. And what I'm finding is a lot of people have got more energy to do their day jobs, just to live life, and they're enjoying life just by being, more physically active.
Yeah.
So I think that as long as you can sort of train them or communicate with them to see that side of the benefits, that's when I think it really hones in that, it actually does work.
Yeah. I'm thinking maybe we should take a break, because after this I want to delve into catastrophism.
Yep.
And how that sits with evolution.
Yep,
basically.
for sure.
So yeah, we're going to take a quick break. All right, we're live and we're back after a quick toilet break. There's a few things I think that we were going to cover before we get into catastrophism. So we were talking earlier before about meditation, and maybe we can talk about psychedelics and whatnot as well.
Yes, definitely.
So you had something that you wanted to mention about meditation, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that's been critical for me with meditation, and part of, I guess, my spiritual journey, has been looking at different ways to alter our states of consciousness, particularly whilst we're doing meditation. And one of the things that I found fascinating when I sort of delved more and more into the research was this concept that there are vibrations and frequencies in nature which our Earth operates in. A lot of I guess our Earth is surrounded by an electromagnetic field.
Yeah.
Which then in turn creates micro vibrations and frequencies in everything in nature. And a scientist he's a German bloke. His name was something Schumann, and he discovered this, and it's called Schumann Resonance. And what he discovered was basically the vibratory nature of the Earth is at 7.83 hertz, meaning that roughly that it vibrates 7.83 times per second.
Okay.
So everything in nature, from plants to ourselves and everything, is on this vibratory frequency.
Right.
And obviously some interesting studies that were done on that was to look at how much this frequency of vibration influences us and our psyche and our health. A study was done by the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, Germany, where basically they got subjects and they got humans, they put them in an underground bunker, and they artificially removed the 7.83 hertz from nature. So they were in this bunker where it was zero vibratory nature.
Really?
What they found was after about 2 or 3 weeks, they started to get health issues. They were losing their mind. They're suffering from emotional distress. All because basically the natural vibrations of the Earth were removed from where the situation they were in.
Wow.
What they did was, as soon as they introduced that 7.83 hertz back into the environment, all of their issues went away. So knowing that and doing research on that led me to I guess have a look more into the science of frequencies and vibrations and how they affect our consciousness. And when I do a lot of my meditation, I do it on a 432 hertz frequency. which is
So how does that work?
okay. So 99% of the music that we listen to, all of the sounds, all the recordings, all the songs, at the moment they're all recorded on a 440 hertz vibration.
Okay.
Look, there's a whole conspiracy theory around the 440 hertz that it was initially, implemented by the Germans, the Nazis to mind control. That's one theory of it. But
Okay.
hundreds of years ago, particularly when you look at some of the greats in the classical industry, all of their instruments were tuned at 432 hertz. Now, what's really interesting about, I guess, this 432 hertz is that it's consistent with the mathematical pattern of the universe, which links back to the Schumann Resonance of 7.83 hertz.
Okay.
So I guess the theory behind that is if we meditate when certain of sounds and music at 432, it's much more in line with our natural frequency, which aligns with this resonance and the way that every cell in our body responds. This number 432, it's common all around the world in ancient mythology, in science. It's present in ancient Egypt in the pyramids. It's a number that's divisible by 72, and 72 links to the processional cycle, the precession of the equinox. So it's a really, really fascinating thing, this vibratory nature of the earth.
Yeah.
And I've found that meditating to sounds and to music that are on that nature has really changed and shifted the way I meditate.
Right.
Whether it's a placebo effect or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it is definitely changing the way that I meditate and the state that I'm able to get myself into when I listen to this type of music when I'm meditating.
So, is it a particular song or
No,
just sound?
It could just be the frequency that it's recording at. Like even right now, this podcast could be translated and converted into a 432 hertz sound wave.
Okay.
And obviously, I think the theory behind it is that it's really that frequency that we're currently on at 440 hertz is inconsistent with the vibratory nature of everything in the universe. So there's a lot of kooky science behind it, but I have found that meditating to this certain frequency, has had a different sort of, it has affected me in different ways.
Is there any videos or articles we can link?
There are hundreds of articles and links that we can post up for you to read. I said whether you want to believe it or not, it's totally up to you. But it's just something that I'm currently researching and looking more and more into just to see sort of how it affects our consciousness.
Yeah.
And another really interesting one is called binaural beats. Binaural beats, meaning from two different angles, binaural. And basically what that is you listen to certain frequencies or sounds that are different in every ear. So I might have a 10 hertz frequency in a left ear and a 12 hertz frequency in my right ear. And basically what the brain does, it calculates that there's a different frequency in both ears, and it creates that 2 hertz frequency on its own.
Right.
And if you're familiar with different brainwave patterns of, there's alpha, theta, delta, all those different sort of brainwaves, the theory behind the binaural beats is that by your brain creating these frequencies and the difference between the two, it's able to get your brain into a certain state. And again, I've found that me personally, using some of these binaural beats to get into a certain state has helped me to alter my state of consciousness and to get into more of a meditative sort of trance and state like.
Right. Where did you find out about this stuff? Or what prompted you onto this? No idea.
It's just wormholes, you watch one YouTube video, it mentions something, you look further, you research, and it just takes you down wormholes. And I'm a very sort of curious type of guy. I love sort of following my intuition and my inquisitiveness. And I watch a documentary, it'll mention one or two things. I'll make a note and I'll follow that lead and see where it takes me.
Okay. And
that's where a lot of I guess the stuff we're going to be talking about, with catastrophism and even the stuff with psychedelics is all led. It's all led. You research one thing and it takes you to another, and you find out more, and then you deep dive, and it just opens up a whole.
My favorite thing on YouTube is when you get to some wacky documentary and then someone's like, "I came here from Nickelodeon" or some shit.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Now going back to spirituality, so when it comes to this sort of stuff, I follow a lot from a guy called Sam Harris, and he talks about you can have spirituality without needing religion.
For sure.
Spirituality, there's nothing wrong with that. Meditation is one example. He's talked about psychedelics in particular and how in his earlier years he used that to sort of change his mindset. We've been reading a lot. We've been pushing out articles on the Monday Morsels at Neuralle about the use at Johns Hopkins of psilocybin mushrooms and how that can reduce things like anxiety, depression. Tim Ferriss, I know who we both follow, has actually helped fund a lot of these programs which is quite interesting. And you had a point about cannabis,
Yep.
and the use of that. And what was that?
I think the whole issue of cannabis. I think it's something that's been suppressed by our society and I guess by our governments for a long time. And I think it's become more of a political agenda over the years, as opposed to actually looking at the cold hard facts.
A lot of things are fucking political.
Absolutely, it's all bullshit. And I think as more and more research comes to light, I think the veils are being lifted from the cannabis war, and more and more people are realizing that it's not dangerous. Not a single human that we know of has ever died from taking cannabis. And you mentioned before about 2 people have died, from taking their own kombucha.
Oh yeah.
Does that mean kombucha should be banned because 2 people have died?
Yeah.
And it's just, I think it's something that the war on drugs is something that's being fought very, very hard, and we can see all around the world, particularly in America. The rate at which they're legalizing cannabis is changing, and I think the medical marijuana market is significantly opening up. Very rapidly.
Well, here, so one of the guys that we talked to was Adrian Stone. So he's the local venture capitalist, and he literally owns 2 types of stocks. They are lithium ion battery companies and cannabis producers. And he's pretty pro. To him, it's sort of obvious. We've now legalized. It's weird though. So we've legalized it in Victoria, New South Wales, and Queensland.
Yep.
It's slowly being legalized in WA, and I'm pretty sure Tasmania already has it legalized. And then it's just SA and NT that are behind us, and the ACT, of course.
Yep.
But it's interesting how they've legalized it. So it's all medicinal, obviously.
Yep.
Victoria is for childhood epilepsy. New South Wales is for cancer, and Queensland is for anything medicinal, which is really quite interesting. But you can sort of see how that is all changing. And Joe Rogan spoke about it recently. I'm pretty sure it was, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but there was a whole period in the 1920s, 30s, or maybe it was just after Prohibition. And it was a guy who owned a publishing house, and they published on paper, and he owned a tree plantation. And he pushed this whole thing about cannabis and hemp being a bad product. And that's where the whole, what was that program that came out about, how black people were raping white women and stuff like that. And that there's this whole ad or theory that came out of the south of the US back in the 1930s and 40s. And all because this guy wanted to kill hemp because he had a paper plantation. That's what it sprung from. It's so fascinating, isn't it?
It's unbelievable.
And it doesn't harm anyone.
It doesn't. And that's the thing, the stereotypical, if you look at particularly what's happening in America, millions and millions of people have been put in jail for, possessing very, very small amounts of cannabis. And, majority of the people who do use it, whether it's for medicinal purposes or for recreational use, they're at home, they're watching a movie, they're relaxing, they're chilling with their mates. They're not going out there, they're not doing violent crimes majority of the time. And you look at, I guess, the number one drug in our society, which is socially acceptable, is alcohol. It's almost prized in our culture to go out and, to get wasted, man, or to get drunk. And you almost wear it as a badge of honor with, how many beers you drink or whatever like that. And you look at how socially destructive and damaging that is, not only from a social context, but from a personal perspective, from a health perspective. And it really is, I guess it's very frustrating that, that I guess the medical, not only the medical community, but also the governments have sort of turned a blind eye to this. Yeah. And I think, for a very, very good reason is because it is so beneficial. And one of the interesting things I want to touch on, and I guess in relation to cannabis, is we have complex systems in our body that are able to process cannabis. We have a whole system in our body known as the endocannabinoid system.
Yes.
So scientists have gone back, they've looked, they theorize that all vertebrates, dating back to 600 million years is when they reckon it started, have this endocannabinoid system in their body. So they've got receptors in the organs and in glands that has the ability to process this cannabinoid based compounds.
Yeah.
So, particularly one of the most prevalent at the moment is obviously the cannabis plant or the marijuana, which contains THC, which is tetrahydrocannabinol, or CBD.
Yeah.
So THC is the one that gets you high. CBD is the one that's got, I guess, more of the medicinal properties.
Yeah, reduces inflammation and who's the guy that fought Conor McGregor? is it Nick Diaz or Nate Diaz? Nate Diaz was taking CBD oil, like smoking it after the fight to reduce inflammation.
Absolutely. And it's one of the most critical things, particularly the endocannabinoid system. It helps moderate pain. And that's why it's particularly important. I think that's why the medical community is really getting onto this, because it puts the pharmaceutical companies at threat. You've got, here you've got this naturally occurring plant, which has got all of these, medicinal properties, which can do very, very little, damage to our systems, can actually help us get through. It's non-addictive like a lot of the opioid-based, painkiller medications that the pharmaceuticals put people on. And it's natural. One thing I want, from an evolutionary context, if we look at it, I can say that, all right, whether you believe in evolution or not, that's another thing, or whether you believe in creationism or that by intelligent design. So whichever way you look at things, whether we were created by a creator or we have evolved, either way, we have got this system to deal with these chemicals and these plants. So, that's the one that gets me. It's like, why have we got this system? Whether it was put there by design or whether we've evolved over millions and millions of years from adaptation to have this system, we've got it. And I think, if you only have to look at a lot more of the science that's coming to light now on cannabis and, especially the medicinal properties, particularly those for cancer victims or, that have got cancer or those that are, fighting seizures. The benefits are, phenomenal. Yeah. And particularly a lot of it's being done on CBD based oil. So CBD oil, a really interesting documentary on this is called Rick Simpson's CBD Oil. Okay. So Rick Simpson, he's, I guess, the pioneer in cannabis or CBD-based oil for the purposes of, I guess, getting rid of cancer. And he's shown thousands of times you put a little bit of cannabis oil either directly topical on a skin cancer or, orally to help internally. And, the cancer almost goes away in majority of cases. And I think, cancer is $1 billion industry. And all of a sudden you take that away through a naturally occurring plant and through the body's ability to heal itself given the right environment. And that puts all of that at threat. Yeah,
it's quite interesting. I saw this one piece, again, out of Nature. It was through Reddit. I saw the link for it. It was about a guy who had, what is it when you move like Parkinson's? And they would drop like a little droplet of oil beneath the tongue.
Yep.
And they would get the patient to take that and they would sit them down and they would be sitting, wriggling like really badly. And then you could see generally they got to the point where they had stopped moving so much that they could just relax and speak. And it was really, really fascinating.
Absolutely.
And it's sad, man.
It's actually, it really is sad. And it's a sad indictment on our society as well that here's this amazing natural plant which can do these wonders to our body. That have the ability to heal, and they're banned. And it's not, particularly the CBD based ones, they're not getting anyone high. So it's got no,
there's no property in it that would get them
property
high.
In it that's going to get people high. It's got purely medicinal, purposes and values. And the fact that something like that is banned is just, it's a fucking joke. You know what I mean? Here I get really, it just makes me really frustrated, particularly, I guess, from a natural point of view. It's been gifted to us by Mother Nature. We've got this system that has the ability to deal with it and to use it, for good. And here it is; it's banned.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the key receptors for CBD is in the brain, actually.
Absolutely, we have all of these receptors in the brain that are able to deal with it and to process it. And as I mentioned, whether you think we've been intelligently designed or evolution, it's there. It's there. It's been put there for a reason.
Yeah. Now, have you heard? You've heard of the stoned ape theory?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So, can you explain to the audience what that is?
Absolutely. So I guess
and who came up with it?
So the stoned ape theory was, I guess, first postulated by a guy called Terence McKenna. He was, I guess, a psychedelic sort of, I guess, pioneer and public figure in the sort of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And I guess this links to what we were speaking about before in terms of different theories as to why our brain developed and grew over that sort of 2 million year period, from 700 cc's to 1300 cc's that it is today. And the theory of the stoned ape theory sort of postulates that over thousands and thousands of years, our ancestors, they would have been hunting, they would have been gathering, they would have been foraging the forests, and from time to time they would have come across psilocybin or magic mushrooms just growing naturally as they do in many different forms.
Well, the idea is they would see cow shit or some sort of something, and they would peel that because they're gathering.
Absolutely. So they would have seen these mushrooms freely growing in the wild, and they would have eaten them, assuming they were any other vegetable, and they would have had these psychedelic experiences. And what's really interesting that ties into that is that when you take psilocybin, which is the active compound in magic mushrooms, it really does like a really amazing things for the brain. It increases your visual acuity, so you're able to see things better.
Right.
You're able to hear things. You're able to perceive your social situation, your context much better. This is obviously in smaller doses, not getting absolutely high.
Yeah.
But it really heightens your awareness of your environment and all of your senses.
Yeah.
So what that may have done for our ancestors, the theory goes, is it would have given them an advantage in terms of being able to hunt. So that might have given them a greater ability to get meat, to access to meat, to build. But one of the things that I find more fascinating about the theory is if you look at the technology that we've evolved over the periods of time, we came up with stone tools have been around for millions and millions of years. And one of the theories looks at stone technology from 2 million years ago, sort of when our ancestors first became our species, Homo erectus, almost to 50,000 years ago. The stone technology didn't change at all. It was exactly the same.
Right.
Our brains developed so much over so long period of time, but none of the technology that we used has changed. And one of the things which obviously psychedelics does is it forces you to think outside the box. It breaks down those mental barriers that we may have and to think in a different way. And it wasn't until sort of, 50 to 100,000 years ago that we start seeing all this beautiful cave art, in France and around the world. We start to see pictures and diagrams, we start to see religion. We start to see the formation of languages from what we know. So, what was it? What was the catalyst that brought about all of these key changes in our development? And that's what I find the most fascinating, is because here we are, we're living in the Stone Age, and then all of a sudden, none of our technology changes for millions of years. And then boom, just like that, we're thinking outside the box. We're trying new things. We see new technologies. We see smaller, sharper stone tools. And all of this is, just changed so quickly.
Yeah.
So what was it that brought that on? And I think this sort of stone date theory is just really fascinating because it gets you thinking that our ancestors may have had these mushrooms. They may have been going on psychedelic trips and thinking outside the box. And, it's something that's, I think, definitely worth exploring because, these psychedelics, mushrooms have been around for millions of years in their form, and they've got the ability to grow anywhere in nature. And they do, break down the barriers.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is, psychedelics have played a key part in cultures all around the world for thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah, like if you look at the Vikings, I'm currently obsessed with Vikings, the series. You've never seen it?
Never seen it.
Fuck, man, you got to see it. It's on Netflix, but it's only the first 3 seasons, I think. An amazing series. I'm more fascinated because when I did that DNA test, I found out that 60% of my DNA is from 60% of my DNA. Almost 90% of the people who live in Scandinavia and Northern Europe, like Amsterdam, Germany part, they have the exact same polymorphisms and or DNA. So it's quite interesting to see, you sort of get that connection.
Yeah.
But like the use of mushrooms by Vikings is quite interesting, and how they used to use that in their trips and their ceremonial processes. And,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's it was prevalent all throughout ancient Egypt. It's seen in hieroglyphs with the depiction of certain flowers on the walls of caves. I think the plant's called Acacia nilotica, which is it's got one of the psychoactive compounds is DMT, which is dimethyltryptamine, which is I guess one of the active compounds found in magic mushrooms as well, which our brain also produces naturally. This plant is very rich in DMT, and this is obviously depicted in hieroglyphs. So, we have to question, were the ancient Egyptians, taking this and getting themselves into altered states of consciousness?
Yeah.
And, you only have to look at also the shamans from the Amazon, of the Amazon. They've got their own brew that they have made over the years that's played a crucial role in their traditions and their culture. It's called ayahuasca.
Yeah.
And, one of the fascinating things about ayahuasca is it's made from 2 plants in the Amazon jungle. And there are over 100,000 different species of plants in the Amazon jungle.
Right.
They've found the one plant that's rich in DMT, which is a psychoactive compound which gets us to think in certain ways. And because basically this ayahuasca it's a brew which you drink.
Yeah.
So it's water based. They put these 2 different plants in, and it creates a psychedelic brew, and it's taken orally. One of the interesting things is about DMT is it's not orally active. So if you have it, if you drink it just in its pure form, we actually have an enzyme. I think it's amino oxidase or something like that in our bodies that has the ability to repel that. so we can't digest it properly.
Right.
So what these ancient Amazons found was they found the one plant out of 100,000 plus that contains an amino oxidase inhibitor, meaning that it blocks the production of that in our own bodies.
Wow.
So you mix that with the bark of one tree, which is rich in DMT, and you mix it with this inhibitor, which prevents our body from producing the chemicals to absorb it. Mix the two together, you have a psychedelic brew, and that's what I find fascinating.
Yeah,
and
imagine like coming across that.
It's obviously, I think, this sort of touches on what we're going to go into soon about like lost civilization. There's all of this lost technology and knowledge, and where's it gone? I mean, they were doing this thousands of years ago without scientific evidence or research, yet they were able to distinguish and find, these two chemical compounds that work perfectly to put people in this psychedelic state.
Yeah.
And this has been a critical part of their behaviors and their culture for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And it's something that they still practice today.
So let's get into it then.
Yep.
Catastrophism.
Yes.
What is it? Who did you first learn about this from?
Mm-hmm.
And what is it that so fascinates you from an evolutionary perspective?
For sure. I guess if you look at catastrophism, it's any sort of extreme event that's had an impact, on the environment and the way that it operates. So it could be anything from a comet coming and hitting the Earth. We think of the dinosaurs. The comet hit the dinosaurs, wiped them out.
Yeah.
Or it could be a volcanic eruption.
Now,
something that's catastrophic that really changes the face of what's happened on this planet.
So it wouldn't just be, as an example, the recent earthquake in Japan that was devastating but didn't wipe out, an entire country, or does it have to be that at that level? It's got to be like an extinction level event?
I guess it depends what lens you're viewing it through. I think, definitely an earthquake that happened in Japan, it was terrible, and it definitely is a catastrophe. But I guess in the context of sort of where this research takes us in terms of, I guess, the extremes, it looks at, I guess, I think probably cataclysmic events is probably
the proper word.
Proper word. It's key events that absolutely fuck shit up. You know what I mean? And far beyond what we can even comprehend. I mean, you look at what happened 65 million years ago with the Cretaceous boundary with the dinosaurs. Basically, a huge comet came. It was half a mile wide, hit the Earth, basically wiped out the dinosaurs. They were the top of the food chain, wiped them all out. All gone. And we have to. That changed the course of history, because if that hadn't happened, you and I wouldn't be here. Because what happened is when the dinosaurs became extinct, that's what led to the rise of mammals, which we eventually, evolved from.
Yeah.
So we have to actually be thankful for this catastrophic event that happened 65 million years ago. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
So these catastrophic events have played a crucial part, not only in our development, but also the Earth. And this has been happening for millions and millions of years. And I think it's really important to look at these catastrophic events and the role that they have played in our evolutionary journey over millions and millions of years.
Okay.
And it's I guess sort of whilst I sort of delved and deep dived into the research of evolution, I guess one thing that sort of came across was, I guess, this idea of the evolutionary story that we've been told may not necessarily be true. And I guess the prevailing theory that we're told is one of a very sort of linear and structured journey that, we evolved from apes. We slowly, climbed out of the trees. We started walking in the savannah. We grew upright. We started eating meat. Our brains developed. We moved out of Africa. We expanded. And then, gradually over time that we became the species that we are today. Whereas that may not necessarily be true. We think we are the most advanced civilization that has ever lived. Whereas, there's a lot of contradictory evidence to suggest that there might have been, some form of advanced civilization that has lived in the past.
Yeah. And that's not to say it wouldn't be as comparable as what we live in today.
Absolutely.
It's just that, so to give context, our understanding is that civilizations first started around 10,000 years ago.
Absolutely.
So like with the dawn of agriculture, moving away from being a hunter-gatherer species, places like, what's that place in Turkey?
Göbekli Tepe?
Yeah, but there's also another place that was found before that's probably about 10,000 years old, right? So that would be the example of the very first society. And we'll link it later. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. But Göbekli Tepe is how many years old?
So Göbekli Tepe is an interesting one. It was a structure that was found in Turkey, right near the Armenian border. And It is a site that's been dated to approximately 10,000 to 12,000 years old. Okay. And what it is, just to give you a bit of context, I know it's very hard because it's a very visual thing to look at, and we're obviously on audio based. If you think of Stonehenge, a lot of people might have been Stonehenge. They've seen this. It's a circular structure. Göbekli Tepe is very, very similar, but it's 50 times the size.
Oh, wow.
So it is fucking massive. And the thing that's fascinating about Göbekli Tepe is it's astronomically aligned to certain stars in the sky.
Okay.
And this has been shown by linking up, because basically we can go back any time in history and we can look at what the ancient skies look like based on the precession of the equinox. So we live in the Earth has got a cycle. Every 25,920 years, we go through a full processional cycle.
Okay.
So, and that's where obviously all of the celestial bodies and the zodiac signs originally come from. So it takes 72 years to go through 1 degree of processional change. Mm-hmm. And 72 years, 360 degrees, that's where we get 25,920 years from.
Okay.
So the stars and the astronomical alignments that Göbekli Tepe points at in the sky indicate that it's around 10,000 plus years old.
Okay.
Now, what the fascinating thing about Göbekli Tepe is that it was deliberately buried.
Right.
So what we can say was it was built obviously 10,000 years ago, and it was deliberately buried in the sense that there's a lot of very, very small, like pebbles almost, that where it was covered in on. And archaeologists have been able to date that matter based on the soil around that period of time, because you can't date the stones themselves because they don't preserve, you
can't carbon date it.
You can't carbon date it, exactly. So they have to date the organic material that's surrounding when they bury it up.
Yeah.
So it was a structure very much like Stonehenge, 50 times the size, deliberately buried, 10,000 years ago. And, if you look at the prevailing theory of history at the moment, we're told that, pre 10,000 years ago, there was nothing. We were hunter-gatherers. That's what we lived. And then all of a sudden, here's this site for 10,000 years ago. That's how the hell did they build it? If you look at that, the size of it, it's phenomenal. It is absolutely mind-boggling.
Yeah. And,
there's hieroglyphs, there's inscriptions from all animals and creatures which are found all around the world. So some of the hieroglyphs which are on Göbekli Tepe are found in Egypt. They're found on Easter Island. They're found in the Amazon. So there's all of these really interesting things that just don't make sense that are on this structure.
Yeah.
And particularly when you link that to, say, ancient Egypt, you know what I mean? We're told that a lot of the pyramids of Giza are 2,000-3,000 years old. We're told the Sphinx 2,000 or 3,000 years old, and that was the most advanced civilization of the time. Yet with a find like Göbekli Tepe, that just changes the ballgame altogether, because this predates it by 8,000 or 9,000 years.
Yeah.
You've got this highly advanced structure, thousands and thousands of tons worth of stonework that's been carved, quarried, built to perfect astronomical alignment, and it just really makes you wonder, what the fuck were they doing 10,000 years ago?
Yeah. So this sort of gets into these two guys who have been on Joe Rogan's podcast, and
mm-hmm.
we've both probably watched a lot of their videos, mm-hmm. is Randall Wilson and Graham Hancock.
Mm-hmm.
So what are these two gentlemen focusing on in particular?
For sure. So if you haven't already, if you don't know these two guys, so it's Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson.
Oh, it's Carlson.
Carlson. Yep. So they are the most interesting guys I've ever listened to. They've both got podcasts on Joe Rogan. They recently came out with one at the end of last year where both of them are on. And they've both got individual podcasts with him as well.
Yeah.
So Graham Hancock, he's done a lot of work on, lost civilizations. So his research over the last 20 or 30 years is he's gone around the world. He's looked at all of these sites, archaeological sites, which don't make sense. And he's basically come to the conclusion that the civilization which we know, it might be a lot older than we think. Because again, if you look at the linear sort of story we're told of evolution, it's that 10,000 years ago, we somehow came out of the Stone Age, and we entered the Neolithic era. It's where agriculture was born. It's where, our civilization started.
Yeah.
So he goes around and he looks at, astronomical sites. He looks at just basically things that civilization's a lot older than we thought.
Yeah. So, and which is just to add to people, when we find this stuff, it's not like there's no pseudoscience with this. It's just that archaeology doesn't really know. I mean, geologists don't really know. Well, archaeologists and geologists don't really know when was the first society. We can't know.
We will never know.
We can't know unless we were there. There's no data to show
mm-hmm.
that. So when things like this site in Turkey are found, it's huge.
Massive. And I think that's what's really frustrating about, I guess, the field of archaeology and, a lot of other people and historians working on this is that they've been brought up to think in a certain way with a certain paradigm. The whole educational system is brought upon on a certain belief system. And to go completely against that, it's very contradictory. And, people have got their PhDs, their whole life's work has been dedicated to a certain philosophy and mindset. And anything that's completely outside of that sphere of thinking, they can't comprehend and they're not willing to accept it.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of these evidence is sort of challenging the conventional wisdom as to sort of how we came about, what other civilizations there may have been. And it's really, really fascinating because, and especially, say with a site like Göbekli Tepe, archaeologists or historians will go there, but they may not necessarily have the broader context to understand of how it relates to other sites around the world that have similar hieroglyphs, or they may not be able to look at it from an astrological perspective and see how it relates to the stars in the sky.
Yeah.
So what Graham Hancock is doing is he's really incorporating a lot of this research and science and looking and joining the dots between all different types of, I guess, researchers and scientists and trying to piece it together to really try and understand what the hell was going on.
Yeah. And so if we talk about these sites, how does that relate to the topic of catastrophism?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So one thing which really relates to this, which hones in on sort of that date of 10 or 11,000 years ago, is all of this evidence has only come to light in the last one or two couple of years. It's really become mainstream.
Yeah.
And basically there was this period of time 12,800 years ago known as the Younger Dryas.
Yes.
It was 1,200 years. It was a window where the Earth went through a fucking hell.
Yeah. So
what the evidence is showing now is 12,800 years ago, there was a comet impact that hit North America.
Right.
And for those of you, just to give you a bit of context of North America at that period of time, pretty much from, say, half of North America all the way up to Canada, that was covered in ice sheets. It was completely covered in ice.
Yeah.
And, it was 2 miles deep of ice. So 2 miles high. So in Australia, that's 3.5 kilometers.
Yeah.
So if you can imagine a 3.5 kilometer wall of ice completely covering North America, it's massive. And what they found is that this comet has hit this ice cap in North America and completely destroyed nearly everything. So
basically wiped smashed the continent.
So it's smashed the continent. So it's hit this ice cap at they believe it was more than a mile wide, which is bigger than the one that hit the dinosaurs. Mm-hmm. It would have been coming in at 60 or 70, 80,000 kilometers per hour. It's hit this ice cap and it's basically caused it all to melt.
Yeah.
So if you can imagine something the size of America and beyond with 3 kilometers worth of ice melted almost instantly within a day.
Right.
That would have caused giant flooding everywhere. Yeah. The implications of that is, sea level all around the world rose by about 150 meters.
Yeah.
So that instantly wipes out the landmass of North America and China put together, just completely wiped out, because obviously all the coastal civilizations would have been wiped out. As a consequence of this, there would have been plume and dust that would have been thrown into the atmosphere. The sun would have been blocked out. There would have been continental wildfires. And just to show you some of the evidence that's been backed up with this is, they've found all of these impact proxies, which are basically markers left by this comet impact all over North America, all over Europe, which is basically a type of, they call it nuclear glass. So it's a very, very small type of glass and nano diamonds, which are only formed under extreme heat. And the only way that heat like that could have possibly happened was through a comet impact.
Or a nuclear bomb. Which we wouldn't have back then.
Which we don't know. There might have been, but we don't know.
I'm going to say not.
So probably not. So either way, there's this evidence all around the world of this nuclear glass, which shows that there was a massive event that happened.
Yeah.
And to back up the continental wildfires, we can see that all around the globe, particularly North America and sort of the western side of Europe, is this, what they call in geology, it's a black matte layer. So if you think of it's literally like an Oreo cookie. You've got sediment of rock that's built up, and then all of a sudden there's this clear black line all around the earth, this black line. And what that signifies is that there were continental wildfires everywhere, and this left soot and markings everywhere in the geological record.
Okay.
And what we see is below that line, we see all of the megafauna. So we see woolly mammoths, we see saber-toothed tigers, we see rhinos. And particularly in North America, we see evidence of the natives that were living there at the time called the Clovis culture. So this impact is also known as the Clovis comet.
Okay.
So basically, this comet's hit 12,800 years ago. It's wiped the slate clean. There's wildfires. The sun's blocked out. There's basically 1,200 years where the Earth has gone to shit. Our species would have been on the verge of extinction. Most of the people living in North America would have been completely wiped out. All over Europe, there would have been the sun blocked out. It would have been very hard. Resources would have been scarce.
Yeah. So to give context to this, and going back to what you're saying before about proxies, so people really do need to go see to understand this contextually. The Randall Carlson video in particular, because what he does is he shows how in Greenland climates. So he when you're looking at climate and geology, you need proxies to prove a position. Mm-hmm. So he goes and looks at, in Greenland for 5 years, they dug into the ground through the ice cap to show year by year what was the change in oxygen isotopes, which shows the temperature. Mm-hmm. So around this period, when we're talking about the comet, you can see the average temperature dramatically, like exponentially. It's literally like a straight line going up, then back down, then up again. So it's like it's going to our current daily average to an ice age, to our daily average to an ice age, and then back up again. It's quite extraordinary. And then he contextually gives shows that in the year 1100, when we had the Black Plague, the average temperature change was like 0.5 degree to a degree. And the result of that was widespread famine, the Black Plague, basically a third of the European society being wiped out. Yep. And then you look at that comet event, we're looking at like an 18-degree change. And to give people even further context, a 2-degree change is the difference between New York being under ice and being underwater. So it's pretty – I don't know how humans would have survived. I mean, they must have just remained within – highland areas. Oh, it would have been. I don't know how else they would have survived. Looking at this,
it would have been a terrible time to live. And we're very fortunate that we are here right now having this conversation, because there would have been a very small, few select band of individuals that would have survived.
Yeah.
It's catastrophic, and I think you touched on a lot of the ice core samples, and all of this is backed up by hard science. So if you look at all the work that Randall Carlson's done and Graham Hancock, it's all there. It's scientifically proven. There's undeniable evidence. All of this material is highly visual, so I definitely recommend. There's documentaries. There's they're on Joe Rogan. You've really got to see it for yourself.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is pre 10,800 years ago, we were exiting the last ice age. So global temperatures were starting to rise very, very slowly, and then all of a sudden, as you said, there's a spike.
Yeah,
boom!
Bang.
All of the ice melts, and it literally shoots up. I think like 10 degrees. Yeah. Something ridiculous, almost overnight.
Yeah.
And what that sort of coincides with is obviously this comet hitting the ice cap, causing massive floods, wildfires. The Earth heats up, and then all of a sudden, boom, it spikes back down again.
Yeah.
And what's really fascinating is around this same period of time, you've got all of these myths and legends which talk about a great flood.
Noah's Ark.
So you've got Noah's Ark, you've got the Epic of Gilgamesh. There's stories in Aboriginal Dreamtime about obviously floods as well.
Yeah.
And you've got all of these accounts which date to exactly the same period of time, which mention a flood.
Yeah.
Which I think is fascinating. And you've also got the city of Atlantis, the lost city of Atlantis, which they talk about, which falls at exactly that same period of time.
Yeah.
Graham Hancock touches on this quite a lot in a lot of his research. But I guess it's really fascinating to think that 12,800 years ago there was a comet that hit the Earth that significantly changed the way that we live today.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is when he starts showing what geologically, say, Europe would look like without with water lines or shorelines receding, and it's like the British Isles go from being there to there being no British Isles. It's just it's part of Europe. Like Europe expands, and then all of the channel and everything just becomes Europe. So it's really intriguing. And again, to add further context to this, the reason why these guys are talking about this topic is that they're concerned, obviously, about the climate there's no question that humans have impacted the environment. We know that from a carbon perspective. But what they're trying to show with the context of this, average temperature change is there could be even greater things that impact us as well. And we should also, as a topic of climate science we should be investigating this as well. And it sort of goes to Elon Musk saying, we need to hedge out the risk of the human species dying off by becoming interplanetary. I think it's one of the most important things, and it sort of, it annoys me so much with all this shit about politics right now and how this is just so important.
It's unbelievable. We live in a very, very fragile environment, cosmic environment, where there are literally hundreds of millions of objects floating around the Earth that we don't even know about, which could potentially come and hit us.
Yeah.
And we would not have a fucking clue.
Yeah.
And that would completely change everything. And we're not prepared for it. And unfortunately, like you touched on, a lot of our government money, or, we spend too much money investigating things like nuclear war, spending it on shit that's not necessary when we don't pay any attention to our cosmic environment.
Yeah.
And it's, we've got these near Earth objects that have got the potential to hit us at any time.
Yeah.
And if any one of those, came and hit us, we would be absolutely stuffed.
Yeah. Well, one of these, so to further that, Neil deGrasse Tyson, the famous astrophysicist who does the Cosmos, Carl Sagan's original series, he spoke about this. So he says that we understand what is coming within our space. Mathematically, we can calculate it. However, we only have on paper the means to stop that impact. We don't physically have it. So his sort of point was, we can do it, but would it be enough time to resolve the issue?
It's a really interesting question. The answer is, at the moment, probably not. We probably don't have the technological resources to go in there and to really have an impact or be able to change the course of a comet.
Yeah, because you couldn't, if you were to go for a comet, you couldn't just blow it up with a bomb. You'd have to redirect its course or even grab it and bring it to Earth and harvest it. Because, if you just shoot missiles or nuclear warheads up to a comet and it breaks into 1,000 pieces and then those 1,000 pieces start coming into the atmosphere, then all hell will break loose.
Absolutely.
And all you have to do is look at that small comet that came in, where was it? It was in Russia.
Yep.
A couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And the effect that had, 1,000 people injured. I think it was like 20 people dead.
Very, very, very fortunate, because with that, if that was just a tiny bit bigger, the angle was a little bit different, it would have been going a little bit faster.
And that's the thing.
That could have completely, changed our perspective on things, and it could have wiped out a lot of people.
And I speak to my brother who's doing his masters now in maths and physics, and he just says that, degrees, the level of it's not so much acceleration but deceleration. So like the angle it's coming in and the speed it's coming in makes a huge difference to how quickly it can stop when it hits the Earth, and therefore the explosion or impact after that.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think one of the interesting things about when comets hit the Earth is that the Earth doesn't absorb it; it disperses it.
Yes.
So it's like if you drop something in water, you'll see the water doesn't absorb it; it then spreads out.
Yeah.
So every time something hits the Earth, the effects are felt,
around it,
all around the planet.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting about Russia is there was another near-Earth miss that happened in 1908.
Was it
so it's called Tunguska.
Tunguska.
So it was the Tunguska event, which happened in 1908. So what happened then was a comet was on the trajectory to the Earth, and it blew up basically in the outer atmosphere above our sky. Now, it's basically like a nuclear bomb going up in the sky in the clouds. Now, because of that impact carrying such kinetic power, that caused basically everything on the ground underneath it to be completely wiped flat.
Yeah.
Thankfully for the people of the time, it happened, sort of in Siberia or, outside of areas that were populated.
Yeah. And
just to give you a bit of context, this was a very, very small comet, only a couple of 100 meters wide. And that alone blowing up in the atmosphere destroyed at an estimated 80 million trees.
Wow.
80 million trees just by this object, 50 meters wide blowing up in the air.
Yeah. And,
the one that killed the dinosaurs, they said, was 0.5 kilometer wide. This impact one that happened 12,800 years ago was about 1 kilometer wide.
Wow.
So that's really puts into perspective of how much, these things outside our control and in the environment can really come and change the course of history.
Yeah.
And, just sort of to touch on some of the things that, Graham Hancock and I guess Randall Carlson talk about is, these events have changed our the course of history. It's undeniable. It's like, we mentioned that the dinosaurs, we wouldn't be here if that event hadn't happened. And then more recently, this catastrophic event that happened 12,800 years ago. And then, it really sort of puts into question a lot of these things, particularly in Egypt, that, like the Sphinx or the pyramids. And one of the interesting things about the Sphinx that they go into is that even might be, older than 12,000 years ago. That may have survived the flood or, this cataclysm. Because, if you think about anything, when there's mass floods like what would have happened 12,800 years ago, everything underneath it would have been completely wiped out. You only have to look at what happened to the floods in Thailand and Indonesia over the last, I think 5-6 years ago, there were massive floods. Everything along the coastal lines got completely wiped out.
Yeah.
So if you can imagine a wave, kilometers high, pushing, a certain amount of punch, that would have just completely wiped out anything that was underneath it.
Yeah.
And the only thing that would survive would be stones. Even in our modern day society now, if every single human on the planet right now were to disappear, how long would it take for our infrastructure, for our roads, everything that's man-made? How long would that take for that to completely go away?
Yeah.
And it's the answer is not very long. Within 1,000 years, there'd almost be nothing of what we know today, from laptops to plastics to buildings. The Earth will just absolutely eat it all up. And you only have to look at what happened with the nuclear disaster in Chernobyl in the 80s. That's pretty much a ghost city now. All the infrastructure has been completely left since then, and even then, there's significant amounts of decay and everything, and that's only 30 years old.
Yeah.
So it just makes you wonder if this common impact 12,800 years ago, we don't know what might have been there before.
Yeah.
And particularly with the Sphinx, there's a lot of really interesting science that has been done on it by geologists that have looked at the erosion patterns on the enclosure of the Sphinx. And what they've found is, for those, Egyptologists and history books tell us that the Sphinx is, 2,000 or 3,000 years old. It was built by certain, Egyptian kings and pharaohs, whereas, the geological record on the stones tell a completely different story. There's two different types of erosion which can occur on rocks. One is through water erosion. One is through sort of wind and sand erosion.
Okay.
And what they've found on the enclosure of the Sphinx and also on the body of the Sphinx is that there is significant amounts of water erosion, which are clearly you can see through pictures. And I definitely recommend a documentary called The Mysteries of the Sphinx. It's an old one. It was, I think, made in the mid-90s. It's narrated by Charlton Heston. So it's a fascinating documentary that goes into it in detail. But if you look at, if the enclosure of the Sphinx and the Sphinx itself has water erosion, the only possible way that would have happened was through thousands and thousands of years of rainfall. And from the geological record and through looking at the climate and the temperature, the last time that there was a significant amount of rainfall in the Giza Plateau, where it's located, was more than 5,000 years ago.
Right. Which
really significantly puts into question the date of the Sphinx and also puts into question the age of, obviously, the pyramids themselves.
Okay.
So it's been,
And they're meant to be 2,000 years old.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Sorry, I think it's 2000 BC, so that'll be like 4 or 5,000 years old.
Yeah.
But the last time there were significant amounts of rainfall were 10,000 years ago.
Okay.
And it would have taken thousands and thousands of years of rainfall for this type of erosion to have occurred.
Yeah. It's really fascinating.
And, and also what's really interesting about the Sphinx is they, the ancient Egyptians were really in tune with mythology and what was going on an astronomical point of view. They were really in tune with the precession of the equinox, how our Earth orbits in the Earth, the stars. There's obviously a lot of work that's been done on the Orion correlation with the 3 pyramids of Giza being aligned to the stars. But what's really interesting about the Sphinx is obviously, the theory is that it was meant to be a lion. Okay. It was initially a lion. Because one of the things which doesn't make sense about the Sphinx is every single piece of hieroglyphic, drawings or architecture or design that they did, everything was in perfect symmetry. Every body that they've done is perfectly aligned. The proportions, the symmetry, the geometry of humans and of animals, it's that advanced. Yet when you look at the Sphinx side on, the head is significantly out of proportion to the rest of the body. So that doesn't fit in in context with what all of the other hieroglyphs and buildings and architecture that were supposedly built by the ancient Egyptians.
So what would that mean?
So that would mean that potentially it was originally a lion, and that the damage to the head was so bad, either from this water erosion or it was badly damaged, that one of the king's Egyptian pharaohs at a later stage had it carved with his head. And what's really interesting is obviously it's the body of a lion. And when you look at how in tune they were with the cosmic environment and the stars, is that the body of the Sphinx faced the celestial body in the time in the period of Leo in the astronomical cycle. And the last time that we were in that cycle was around 11,000 years ago. So it would have been facing the celestial body of Leo on the spring equinox when the sun was rising.
Yeah.
So at the moment we're in the age of Pisces, and I'm sure a lot of you are aware of that song, the dawning of the age of Aquarius, which is where we're sort of on the borderline now. So I just think it's fascinating to think that it might have been a lion. It's currently facing it would have lined up to 11,000 years ago, facing its celestial body Leo in the skies at 11,000 years ago. And another really interesting guy who's also been on Joe Rogan called John Anthony West.
Okay.
He is absolutely fascinating with his knowledge of Egypt. He's got
Didn't he pass away recently?
I don't know, did he?
I feel like there was something I saw about that.
He's got, I think there's a crowdfunding thing at the moment because
he's got cancer.
He's got cancer and he's looking for alternative methods, and he doesn't have the funds for it. So then there's
what was his name again?
John Anthony West.
Yeah.
And he's got a really good documentary series called Magical Egypt, which explores, I guess, all of these hieroglyphs, the structures of the pyramids, how they were built, how they align to certain stars, how they align to certain times, when the skies were aligned. And it's truly fascinating. So he's really gone into this research looking at, and he even believes that the Sphinx may even be one age older. So I mentioned before with the cycle, the processional cycle is 25,920 years old. He reckons that the Sphinx may be the previous cycle when it was facing Leo, which would mean it's about 30 to 36,000 years old.
Wow.
So these are all things that we've got to consider. And I guess it really sort of, makes you think about, the story that we've been told versus these alternative possibilities.
But also just the world that we live in and how, the thing that got me was when Neil deGrasse Tyson was saying, like, if you think about us as a species, so any mammalian species, its average lifespan is 3 million years. Mm-hmm. And it just shows the probability of success past that period is so low. You think about how old the dinosaurs were, they were completely wiped out. Mm-hmm. So it just makes sense for us as a species to be looking at alternative ways of, not just protecting the earth, but moving away from it, just in case, That's why I love Elon Musk.
Absolutely. No, he's a pioneer in the industry, and he's obviously looking for ways to obviously colonize Mars, and he's doing a lot of fantastic things with obviously batteries and solar power, and I think that's sort of where the future is going as well.
Definitely.
And one really interesting point, how I want to link all of this, I guess, catastrophism and what you just touched on with, I guess, our evolution, is to link it back and look at just one thing for the listeners here to contemplate and to think about, is that our species, which we currently are, which is Homo sapiens sapien, we've been around anatomically, or the oldest anatomically modern human that they've found from the fossil record is 195,000 years old.
Yeah.
So that means this fossil was found, it's dated to 195,000 years old. It's identical to us. It'd look like us, it would perform like us, it had the same brain size as us, absolutely everything. So based on what we've found, us as a species, we're that old, 195,000 years.
Okay.
Now, if we just go back 100 years, 150 years, and you look at the innovation and the development that's happened since that period of time, I'll put it in generational context, which Randall Carlson's done in a lot of his things. The average generation is 20 to 25 years. If you look at 195,000 years since our species has been around, divide that by the average amount of generations, that leaves roughly 8,000 generations. Okay. That our species has been around in anatomically modern form.
Yeah.
If you go back 150 years, that leaves 6-7 generations. We have gone from horse carriage to motor car, to aeroplanes, to space travel, to mobile phones, to everything in 150 years.
Yeah.
Like when you sit down and you stop and you think about the technological development that we've had in 150 years, in 5 or 6 generations, it's unbelievable. It's absolutely mind-blowing. And then you think, all right, if that can happen in 6 or 7 generations, and our species has been around for 8,000 generations, who knows what we might have accomplished before? So, I mean, you only think, I just want to put that in context because it's absolutely mind-blowing. Yeah. We've gone from horseback to, exploring the moon in 5 generations.
Yeah.
And we've been around for 8,000 generations.
Yeah.
So if we're able to make those advanced leaps in that short amount of time, we don't know what might have happened pre 10,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Because that would have left, thousands of generations to explore and to develop their culture and their technology, with exactly the same brains and faculties and anatomically modern as what we have right now.
Yeah. I mean, I saw that point that he made, and I think it's a brilliant point. But there's one argument I'd put to that is that with technology is exponential.
Mm-hmm.
Almost all technology is ever exponential. So the initial improvements are very linear or non-existent, and then by the end are 100 times to 1,000 times. So that's something that I think that us as humans can get confused on because we think of things on a linear time frame. But
sure.
it's a valid point because
Definitely.
even if technology was exponential back then, it raises the question of how we were so simple 10,000 years ago based on what we currently know.
Exactly. Well, I guess, the linear sort of thinking for our evolution is that just by chance, 10,000 years ago, we somehow came out of the Ice Age. We somehow started agriculture. We somehow started civilizations. All of a sudden, it's like, hunter-gatherer doesn't all of a sudden go from hunting and killing to sitting around a campfire thinking, oh shit, I'm going to start farming and putting crops here, or I'm just going to start building, even Göbekli Tepe, for example.
Unless they were taking lots of
mushrooms. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it really puts a lot of things into perspective.
Yeah.
And I think, exactly what you've touched on is, technological advancement is very exponential, and you only have to look at what's happened in the last 100 years to prove that. But that may have happened before. You look at how advanced the pyramids were. You know what I mean? That was, it's a highly advanced structure. So is Göbekli Tepe. And there's all of these sites around the world that are got, phenomenal displays of advanced technology.
Yeah.
And when you think about with this comet event that happened 12,800 years ago, that would have wiped the slate clean. And even if you look at our modern technology today, hypothetically, if a comet equivalent of that size hit us right now and wiped out, to say, the majority of the Western and developed world, all of our power stations down, everything's down. All of our knowledge at the moment, it's stored on computers, it's stored on laptops. And if all of that goes, how long would it take for us to get back to where we are right now? Mm-hmm. And, it may take hundreds or thousands of years. And, if all of our advanced society was wiped out, the ones that would survive a cataclysmic event moving forward would be the ones that are living at the moment still a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. The ones that are in Africa that know how to hunt, that know how to survive, the tribes that are still living in the Amazon.
Yeah.
And, it would only take a couple of generations before they're telling their kids that, hey, there was one day this civilization that were able to talk to each other on the other side of the planet, or, they could fly to the moon, or they could fly like birds in the sky. And, very, very quickly we would lose that technology. If something happened, it were all wiped out. And I guess, the only way of preserving all of that knowledge is by keeping it in stone architecture, because that doesn't go away. So it just sort of begs or raises the question that if we were wiped out, the ones that would probably survive would be those existing hunter-gatherers. And, at the moment, they rely on the technology that we provide them, if anything. So it's, what technology would survive if there was a massive flood or a cataclysmic event now? Yeah. And how long would it take for us to get to where we are again right now? Because we would be so preoccupied with surviving and finding food and shelter that we wouldn't have time we wouldn't give a shit about finding, building iPads or computers or cars. And, 1 or 2 generations down the track, all of that knowledge would go.
Yeah.
And our grandkids and our grandchildren's children would have no idea or even a concept. They might find a buried iPad, but they wouldn't know what the hell it is because they've got no context.
Yeah.
So it just really puts into perspective that, we've been around for millions and millions of years with very similar architecture and brain structure, yet we only had this gigantic leap, 10,000 years ago. Yeah. So it just raises a lot of interesting questions.
It does. Well, it's all very, very interesting, and I'm starting to get wary of time because I want to jump into some quick questions.
Yep.
Do you have any morning rituals or routines?
Not really. The only thing for me is I just wake up and I have a cold shower straight away.
Okay.
That's the only thing that gets me up. It gets me awake. I'm alert. I'm feeling fresh for the day, and that's how I start my day.
Yeah. Have you had any over the last couple of years, any best purchases under $200?
I think the best purchase for me has been a Google Chromecast.
Oh, really?
So I don't have an Apple TV. I'm an Android guy, so I bought a Google Chromecast. And for me, and a lot of the research and the stuff that I do, everything's on YouTube.
Okay.
Every documentary, a lot of things that are through YouTube. And I think the great thing about the Google Chromecast It costs $60, and it allows me to stream directly from my phone, whatever's on YouTube, and it plays it directly on your TV.
Yeah.
And that's the best investment and the best $60 I've ever spent.
Okay. What do you think has been the most influential book on your life, or like a book that you would gift to anyone?
I would definitely think Graham Hancock's latest book. It's called Magicians of the Gods.
Right.
And that really goes into a lot of depth and scientific, research behind all of the stuff we've just explained on cataclysms. He talks about all of these lost civilizations. He talks about the technology they had. And I guess it just sort of gives you a different context, and it makes you think differently about our history, where we've come from, how we've come about, and what information is out there. And I think for those that are open-minded, it's definitely a book worth reading, and it really sort of gets you thinking about alternative possibilities of history. And it's a very comprehensive book, and it's fascinating if you've got time. I highly recommend to read.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to be putting that on my list. I always like to ask this of all guests. Do you have any particular favorite podcasts that you listen to, other than Joe Rogan, of course?
Joe Rogan, he's my number one. I find his podcasts are fascinating, and for those of you that haven't heard of him, I go and just binge listen. Particularly for some of the guys that we've mentioned today, and I'm sure you'll put all of them in the notes to follow.
Yeah.
So he's definitely number one, just because he, it's very conversational. He explores a lot of topics, and it's just very, very informative. Another one which I've got on recently, it's called My Seven Chakras.
Okay.
It's very, more looks at from a spiritual context. He interviews a lot of people that have got a lot of interesting ideas on the spirituality side of things, whether it's how to open up certain chakras or what beliefs might be limiting us. And it's a very sort of spiritual podcast, and I think it's good to break it up and to listen to that every now and then.
Mm-hmm.
And another one which I would recommend, it's called We Study Billionaires, a business podcast. And it's two guys from America, and they either interview someone who's a billionaire or someone that's very, very wealthy, and they speak about what principles they believe in, what's led to their success, and how we can sort of, what lessons can we take away from that?
Yeah.
And they also, review a lot of, critical business books as well. And it's a really sort of fun, easy to listen to podcast.
Do you then have your own principles that you stick to? Is there anything that really guides you at all?
For me, it's just keeping everything as simple as possible. Try not to overcomplicate things. And I think the main one for me, which I try and get everyone to think, is just be curious and be open.
Yeah.
There's so much information out there, and I think too often than not, people don't question anything. They just take what's given to them. They read what's in the papers. They think it's truth. Same with history books. They think it's there. Go out and be curious. If you're interested in, whatever it is, whether it's, education, nutrition, science, geology, just find something you're interested in and just research it.
Yeah.
And just having an open mind and be willing to explore new ideas. And I think that's something that as a society, we don't do enough. And, we've got this amazing technology around us, particularly with YouTube. We've got, podcasts like what we're doing now, which has all of this information readily available. And I think it's something that we need to tap into more and to question things.
Oh, definitely. I think that people have just become sort of like drones. Mm-hmm. They don't, we've got this stuff available, but they just don't use it to its full capacity. Mm-hmm. Last question.
Mm-hmm.
What is something that nearly no one agrees with you on, but is true? Like the other way I phrase it is, what insight about life seems sort of obvious to you, but not to others?
I guess a lot of the things probably what we've just sort of touched on. I like to look at alternative versions of history and, what we've just spoken about cataclysmic events, and just to really look at other things that may influence certain topics. I think it's just to have an open mind.
Yeah.
Because I think
sort of looking at both sides.
Just to look at both sides of the equation. And I think if you have an open mind, you're more willing to look at both sides of the equation. You're more willing to analyze the data, make up your own opinion. But then I also think by both looking at both sides, it gives you a better perspective, and it also eliminates confirmation bias.
Yeah.
So, for those of you, confirmation bias is where we seek out information that already fits our existing beliefs.
Yeah.
And I think that can be detrimental to growth, because it forces you to only research the stuff that you already know and that fits your existing paradigm.
Yeah.
And if you've got an open mind and you're curious, you're more willing to look at both sides of the equations, and it gives you just a better perspective on things.
Yeah. It's such an important point, because, you think about people, they go on Google, they search a certain topic, and they don't realize that they're actually filtering each heading by what fits their bias,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to just looking at each topic, or sorry, each article, let's
Absolutely.
say. And that they just don't realize that is their brain. Because, I mean, confirmation biases exist because of there's just so much information.
Absolutely.
They need humans need to make a decision fast. So that's a really good point, and probably cap it off with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look, I really appreciate this. Where can people find you?
So if people are interested in contacting me or looking at some of the stuff that I'm doing, the best is through my website, which is tribalwellness.com.au.
Okay.
I've got a Facebook page, Tribal Wellness Australia. I've got an Instagram, tribal_wellness.
Yep.
And one thing which I'm currently working on at the moment is looking at starting my own podcast as well.
Yeah.
So I guess, once this sort of comes to light, I'll be sending you links, and it'll be linked on the page where this podcast is. The website is going to be feedmymind.com.au.
Okay.
So that's in the development stages, getting everything ready. And it's really going to explore ideas, sort of what we've touched on today, and just really a page for people to go to and really improve them, help better themselves by a whole range of different knowledge, like knowledge sources and bases.
Definitely. Well, look, we'll link all this. So I really hope you get that podcast up and running. I hope we can do this again as well. And thanks so much. It's been awesome.
No worries. Thanks for having me on the show, Jordan. I really appreciate it, and I'm very grateful to be here. And thanks for your time and listening.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Nice. Cheers.
Before you head off, thank you for making it this far. It's been a real treat doing this. Like I said, make sure you head to neuralle.com/podcast to learn about our prizes. Sign up to our weekly brain food called the Monday Morsels at neuralle.com/sign-up. That is neuralle.com/sign-up. Leave us a review. It's really important to us that we can get quality reviews and build feedback as to whether to continue with this. Check us out on Facebook at Neuralle, Neuralle. Until next time, speak soon.